Hey Guy, today we're going to talk about the topic of armor. Throughout human history, there have been countless wars. So have you ever wondered who first invented armor, how powerful these defenses were, and what the journey was like from crude cloth armor to solid iron plate? Let's dive into the story. If you enjoy it, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating tales. The first dawn of warfare found humanity unarmored, naked but for skins and the rough weavings of homespun cloth. Our ancestors, cast from the womb of nature into a world of jagged stone and sharpened sticks, discovered rather swiftly that flesh alone was a fragile barrier against tooth and claw. In the flickering glow of campfire light, they pressed hides to skin, tucked layers of animal pelt under sinew bindings, and soon learned that even rudimentary coverings, thick porcine hide, cured and draped, could turn a slicing blade or snapping jaw into a mere whisper of pain rather than a fatal strike. These earliest armors were born of necessity and chance, an accidental layering of furs to stave off winter's chill became a fortuitous defense against prey and predator alike. The hunter-gatherers of the Paleolithic era, moving in small bands across grasslands and forest edges, experimented with different skins, bear for its toughness, deer for its suppleness, and stitched them together with strips of tendon. They discovered, by trial and error, that overlapping patches reduced gashes, that tanning hides in smoke and soaking them in natural oils improved water resistance, that padding beneath rough hair could absorb the blunt force of a club or cudgel, yet cloth and leather, for all their ingenuity, remained vulnerable to piercing implements. Spears tipped with flint and bone found purchase in seams. Arrows spilled blood clean through soaked hides. Against these threats, visionaries among the clans fashioned rudimentary scales, small, flat discs of bone or antler perforated and laced by sinew onto a leather backing. This innovation, born likely in the forests of Eurasia some 25,000 years ago, represented humankind's first systematic attempt to distribute the force of impact across many small points, much as the tortoise shell dispersed the bite of crocodiles. These proto-scale armors, crude though they were, conferred a precious edge in tribal skirmishes. One warrior's breast might be shielded by dozens of antler plates, catching the lethal thrust of an enemy's lancet-sharp spearhead and skidding it aside. Others experimented with layering, placing successive coats of felted cloth beneath the scales, like the concentric bark of ancient trees, each layer slowing the fatal momentum of an arrow. Hunters wearing such gear found themselves emboldened to stalk larger prey: aurochs, woolly rhinoceros, even cave lions. The same protections soon found uses in intertribal conflicts, as bands clashed over territory and game. By the time pottery and woven textiles emerged in Neolithic villages, armor making had taken modest but significant strides. Spinners and weavers, having tamed flax and wool, crafted thicker, tighter fabrics, textiles that, when layered thrice or more, deflected bone-tipped javelins with surprising success. These quilts of linen and wool, stitched in diamond patterns, formed the earliest gambesons, soft armors that combined mobility with a degree of piercing resistance. In the sunlit courtyards of nascent settlements, Jericho, Çatalhöyük, Mergar, craftsmen and women toiled over looms, unaware that their handiwork would one day influence the panoplies of knights and samurai. Simultaneously, in the dense swamps and marshes of Mesopotamia, artisans discovered that wet leather, heavily oiled and smoked, assumed a remarkable hardness when dried. They moistened hides in rivers, layered them with animal fats, and then heated them over smoky braziers. The once limp skin hardened into a shell-like cuirass, capable of halting copper-tipped arrows and even deflecting the crude bronze blades that characterized early Bronze Age warfare. Kings and governors began to commission suits of leather armor, dyed with natural pigments, reds from ochre, browns from walnut husks, which not only protected but also signified rank and valor. Across the mountains in the Anatolian highlands, the Hittites pioneered the use of metal scales, bronze plates riveted onto leather or heavy cloth. Drawing on the region's rich copper deposits, they hammered small scales into thin crescents, each no larger than a man's palm, then attached them in overlapping rows. The effect was akin to the hide of an armadillo, flexible yet impervious to the cutting and thrusting weapons of their enemies. Though costly to produce, these armors adorn the chieftains and elite warriors of the Hittite Empire, a testament to metal's ascendancy over mere bone and hide. In coastal societies, Crete, Phoenicia, and later the Greeks, seafarers adapted scale armor to suit naval warfare. They crafted smaller, more numerous scales of bronze, affixing them to wool gambesons so that oarmen and marines could row and fight with minimal hindrance. When Mycenaean swords met Greek hoplite spears, the protective potential of these armors became clear. They could absorb and disperse energy more effectively than any continuous sheet of metal known at the time. The Iron Age heralded yet another transformation. Blacksmiths, mastering the smelting of iron and the forging of blade and point, turned their attention to defense. They wrought narrow bars of iron, longer than scales, then perforated and laced them together with leather thongs in a configuration we now call mail or chainmail. Each interlinked ring, when closed and riveted, formed a pliable mesh that conformed to the body's contours, distributing the force of a slash across many rings, thereby preventing penetration. A mail shirt or hauberk could be drawn over a padded gamson, creating a formidable combination of absorption and deflection. This newfound mail armor spread swiftly across Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Celtic tribes wore hamlets of interwoven rings, Persian cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry, rode forth in coifs and hauberks of mail, their galloping hooves beating terror into less protected foes. Warriors from the steppes of Scythia to the valleys of ancient Gaul found their flesh shielded by this revolutionary armor, which balanced protection with a freedom of movement unseen since the days of simple leather and cloth. As the Iron Age dawned across the ancient world, so too did the art of armor evolve in bold new directions. Mail had proven its worth on battlefields from the mist-shrouded hills of Britain to the sun-parched plains of Persia, but for every warrior encased in interlocking rings, there arose innovators seeking greater rigidity, more comprehensive protection, and ever more impressive displays of status. In the hill forts of Celtic Gaul and Britannia, blacksmiths began experimenting with solid metal plates. They hammered iron into broad, thin strips, then contoured them to the shape of the human torso. These early rib bands were riveted over a padded undergarment, perhaps leather or thick woven cloth, creating a primitive cuirass that resisted the weight of a mail shirt and yet afforded superior defense against bronze swords. Roman observers, encountering these Gaulish plate harnesses during Julius Caesar's campaigns, adopted and refined the concept, giving rise to the lorica segmentata, a cuirass composed of horizontal iron bands, flexibly joined by leather straps and buckles, that protected legionaries from shoulder to waist with minimal loss of agility. Meanwhile, to the east, in the vast steppe lands stretching between the Caspian and the Altai Mountains, horse archers of Scythia and later Sarmatia continued favoring male for its combination of mobility and defense. Indeed, in chilly climates, the overlapping rings also served as excellent insulation. Yet even here, warriors experimented with supplementing male with scale elements. Square or almond-shaped bronze plates attached in echelon rows to leather backing, producing lamellar armor. Unlike scalework of antiquity, where scales were fixed solely at their tops, lamellar plates interlocked at multiple points, forming a self-supporting mesh that draped like a blanket of rigid tiles. It was lighter than a full breastplate, yet more protective than mail. Alone against piercing shots, in the sun-baked deserts of Assyria and later Persia, masters of metallurgy perfected the forging of large, curved plates. These muscle cuirasses went beyond simple defensive function and became symbols of martial valor. Shaped to emulate the idealized anatomy of heroic athletes, chiseled pectorals, a taut abdomen, bronze breastplates adorned with inlaid gold, enamel, and embossed iconography were reserved for kings, generals, and priests. Reliefs on palace walls show Assyrian chieftains wearing full bronze lamellar shirts with greaves protecting their lower legs, helmets crested with plumes or animal motifs, and vambraces guarding the forearms. Farther south, in the rich river valleys of the Indus and later the Mauryan Empire, artisans combined the scale and plate traditions into armor of astonishing intricacy. Small, rectangular steel plates, each only a few centimeters across, were pierced with decorative patterns and then wired together in hundreds of rows to form jackets, cloaks, and even hauberks with sleeves. The effect was a fabric of armor, metallic yet supple, capable of bristling like a porcupine's quills against arrows and swords. Inscriptions and tomb finds reveal entire regiments outfitted in this mail of plates, their assemblage so detailed that the points of attachment were often indistinguishable from decorative filigree. In China, during the Eastern Zhou and Warring States periods, strategists and knights experimented with overlapping leather scales lacquered for waterproofing and durability. Each scale was painted, often in divided sections of red, green, and black, and meticulously stitched to silk backing. The lacquer hardened into a glossy shell, repelling both steel and the elements. By the Qin dynasty, these leather lamellar armors were distributed to conscripts and elite guards alike, while generals donned hardened bronze or iron lamellar brigandines, jackets of interior plate sandwiched between heavy cloth layers and riveted closed. The Mediterranean world, too, saw the evolution of defensive gear. Greek hoplites, who had long relied on bronze breastplates over linen linothorax, began augmenting evidence of rank with gilded shoulders guards, pauldrons, and leather skirts, tarujas, lined with metal scales. Their shields, initially simple wood faced with bronze, grew larger and more elaborate, becoming the iconic hoplon, a near-circular disc edged with bronze, capable of smashing through phalanx lines. The shield's protective function extended beyond the individual, locking shields shoulder to shoulder in a wall of overlapping bronze and wood. Greece's successor, Rome, inherited and adapted these innovations. Legionaries still wore mail shirts, lorica hamata, or plate bands, lorica segmentata, but auxiliary troops often donned mail lamellar hybrids. Centurions, marking their status, wore heavier, more ornamented armor, sometimes a solid breastplate cast in one piece, embossed with mythic scenes or oak leaf patterns. Officer helmets featured longitudinal ridges, face guards, and crown crests of dyed horsehair, distinguishing rank at a glance amid the clamour of battle. By the late Roman Empire, as professional armies contracted and frontier pressures mounted, armour became heavier and less uniform. Infantry might bear massive lamellar coats extending below the knees. Cavalry clung to male lamellar cuirasses and wore reinforced helmets with hinged cheekpieces. The Sassanid Persians, Rome's eastern rivals, perfected full-body lamellar harnesses for their cataphract cavalry, covering torso, limbs, and even horse flanks in scale-like protection, rendering them near invincible to arrows until tactics evolved to exploit their heavy cuirasses' rigidity. By the close of antiquity, the heavy lamellar harnesses of Sassanid cataphracts and the segmented irons of Roman legionaries had laid the groundwork for Europe's next great leap in armour, the melding of mail and plate into hybrid forms that balanced rigid protection with the wearer's need for flexibility. As the Western Roman Empire fractured beneath the waves of migration and invasion, its martial innovations diffused into the hands of Germanic chieftains, Frankish kings, and Byzantine emperors, each reshaping armour to suit shifting tactics and technologies. In the ruined forges of late Roman forts, local blacksmiths scavenged rings and plates from battlefield spoils, reworking them into coat of plates ensembles. These early medieval harnesses featured large, roughly triangular iron plates, sometimes as few as 5 or as many as 20, riveted inside a leather or padded cloth surcoat. The arrangement covered vital organs: breast, back, shoulders, and occasionally the upper thighs. Worn over a mail shirt and gambeson, the coat of plates offered greater blunt force resistance than mail alone, yet preserved much of the mail's flexibility. In the ruined forges of late Roman forts, local blacksmiths scavenged rings and plates from battlefield spoils, reworking them into coat of plates ensembles. These early medieval harnesses featured large, roughly triangular iron plates, sometimes as few as 5 or as many as 20, riveted inside a leather or padded cloth surcoat. The arrangement covered vital organs: breast, back, shoulders, and occasionally the upper thighs. Worn over a mail shirt and gambeson, the coat of plates offered greater blunt force resistance than mail alone, yet preserved much of the mail's flexibility. Meanwhile, in the wood-lined halls of Scandinavia and the Baltic, Viking raiders experimented with splintered armour, narrow vertical strips of iron attached to leather or heavy cloth, protecting the forearms, vambraces, shins, greaves, and even the thighs. Their raiding tactics, swift riverine strikes and sudden boarding actions, demanded armour that weighed no more than a mail shirt, but could still repel the stroke of an axe. Splintered defences, sometimes paired with a simple iron skullcap or spangenhelm, struck an effective compromise between mobility and resilience. Farther east, the Byzantine Empire refined brigandine armour, small, parallel plates of steel or iron sandwiched between layers of cloth or leather, their edges hidden beneath sewn-on rivets. Unlike lamellar, the brigandine's interior plates were flat and interchangeable, allowing a single garment to be resized or repaired swiftly. Imperial Guard units wore brilliantly painted brigandines adorned with gold leaf images of the double-headed eagle, while ordinary Tagmata soldiers don simpler, undecorated versions. On the steppes, Turkic and Magyar horsemen enhanced mail shirts with strategically placed plate reinforcements, a solid breastplate clasped the fatades over the chest, small round bosses riveted over the shoulders, and a stout iron gorget protecting the throat. Their enemies, Byzantines, Rus, and Hungarians alike, observed that these light cavalrymen possessed extraordinary freedom of movement, enabling them to shoot volleys of arrows even while bound by plate. As feudal kingdoms coalesced in Western Europe, demand for high-performance armor grew. Knights of the 11th and 12th centuries prized the canvas of mail shirts reinforced at joints with leather patches, but they yearned for greater defense against the ever more powerful crossbows flooding the battlefields of the Crusades. Siege engineers and arms merchants responded with thicker mail and broader plates, giving rise to the jointed cutter at the elbow and the simple yet ingenious rondelle, a round steel plate strapped to the chest over the mail, to guard the underarm and heart. By the 13th century, coat of plates evolved into the coat of plates over mail, in which rectangular plates overlapped like shingles and were secured to the exterior of a mail hauberk. This configuration allowed plates to move independently, following the wearer's gait while still deflecting sword cuts and absorbing bludgeoning impacts. Knights in northern France and England began etching plates with heraldic devices, lions, fleur-de-lis, and crosses, transforming functional gear into symbols of lineage and chivalry. Alongside plate developments, helmet design advanced in tandem. The nasal helm, with its protective nose guard projecting from the brow, gave way to the great helm, a cylindrical helmet enclosing the entire head, pierced only by narrow eye slits and breathing holes. Though cumbersome and hot, the great helm offered unparalleled facial protection against mounted and foot combat alike. Underneath, padded arming caps and mail coif cushioned the skull and neck, completing a layered defensive system that embodied the medieval ethos of maximal coverage. As the 14th century dawned over Europe, a new alchemy took hold in the forges of northern Italy and the Rhineland. The transformation of raw iron into articulated steel plates so perfectly fitted that they mimicked the curves of the human body. No longer content with the patchwork of mail and brigandine, armorers, once simple blacksmiths, emerged as master craftsmen, their names whispered in courtly circles from Milan to Mainz. Their mission: to encase the warrior in seamless protection that moved and breathed as if it were flesh itself. In the crowded workshops of Milan's Borgo Sant'Ambrogio, apprentices labored at bellows and anvil, heating billets of high-carbon steel until they glowed molten orange. Under the guidance of master armorsmiths, often trained in the great cathedrals of nearby Pavia or Verona, they hammered plates over wooden stakes carved to male and female torsos, coaxing the metal into cups for the chest and back, the cuirass, flanges for the shoulders, pauldrons, and slender laminae for the arms, rear braces, couters, vambraces, and legs, cuisses, pollins, greaves. Each piece was not merely functional, but sculptural. Ridges reinforced vulnerable points, fluting dispersed blows, and elegant roping echoed the Gothic tracery adorning grand cathedrals. This new full-plate harness advanced in tandem with changing tactics on the battlefield. The rise of heavy cavalry, knights mounted on powerful destriers, and the proliferation of longbowmen and crossbowmen drove demand for armor that could resist both lance charges and hailstorms of bolts. At Crécy and Poitiers, where English longbows fell charging knights like wheat before a scythe, survivors returned to Europe bearing hauberks pierced with arrows. Proof that mail alone was no longer enough. Lords and squires poured fortunes into commissioning full-plate suits, believing that a single well-forged cuirass could turn aside shafts that had cleaved oak and steel. Yet full plate was more than mere defense. It was a statement of status and identity. Wealthy nobles displayed their harnesses in tournament lists, gilding and etching metal with heraldic imagery. A lion rampant across a breast, the fleur-de-lis of France, the black eagle of the Holy Roman Empire, ceremonial helms, salads with movable visors, armet helmets with hinged cheekpieces, were often as ornate as the regalia worn by princes, encrusted with silver niello and inlaid with delicate filigree. Across the Alps, in the workshops of Augsburg and Nuremberg, German armourers responded with their own reinterpretation, the Gothic-style harness, characterized by sharp, angular lines and prominent fluting. These armours combined defensive strength with dramatic aesthetics. The flutes, running vertically down pauldrons and breastplates, did more than decorate. They added stiffness to the steel and guided sword cuts away from gaps. The articulated folds, overlapping plates that protected the hips and groin, were crafted to balance coverage with the flexibility required for foot combat and mounted jousts alike. Meanwhile, in the Loire Valley and Burgundy, French armourers introduced lighter white harnesses, polished so highly that they gleamed like mirrors under the sun. Without the distraction of painted surfaces or gilding, these harnesses emphasized purity of form and reflected an emerging courtly taste for understated elegance. Knights in white harness would parade through royal processions in Paris and Dijon, their armour catching torchlight like facets of a diamond. As the 100 Years' War raged, battlefield realities continued to shape armour design. Marshals and captains requested additional reinforcement at critical junctures. Laminated gorgets to guard against fauchars and billhooks. Articulated couteres designed to cover the elbow's joint in every bent position. Round besaiges strapped over the armpits to shield the thin spot between breastplate and rear brace. The integration of these pieces into a single, unified system, a true suite of armour, became a hallmark of 15th century craftsmanship. In Burgundian domains, the armourer's art reached its zenith. Court payments recorded in the ducal accounts of Philip the Good and Charles the Bold reveal commissions for dozens of harnesses per year, some costing more than a small manor. These armours featured custom fitting, tailored to a noble's exact measurements, and integrated innovations such as secret rivets that could be tightened or loosened with hidden screws, enabling adjustments in the field. Decorative elements, chased scrollwork, etching of mythic riders and saints, engraved banding, blended seamlessly with the overlapping laminae, so that the wearer appeared clad in living art as much as living steel. Even as plate became dominant, mail persisted beneath. A mail skirt guarded the gap between cuisses and tassets. A coif of interwoven rings extended from the bever to cover the throat. A mail camail, an articulated collar, protected the junction where the helmet met the cuirass. Gambesons remained essential undergarments, their quilted layers absorbing shock and preventing chafing, ensuring that knights could endure the weight and rigidity of full harness for hours on end. Beyond Europe, the influence of plate spread and blended with local traditions. In the Levant, Crusader knights encountered Mamluk warriors in male lamellar armour pierced by visits to smithies in Damascus. Some Europeans adopted hybrid designs, solid breastplates with mail sleeves or lamellar skirts, combining the best features of both worlds. Likewise, Venetian merchants exported northern steel to the Ottoman court, where Turkish artisans welded plates into their own distinct Kirkkilit brigandines, the 40-lock jackets that bore multiple locks and overlapping plates in a fashion uniquely Ottoman. The dawn of gunpowder in the late 15th century rocked the foundations of armored warfare. Early hand cannons and arquebuses hurled lead balls with terrifying force, smashing mail and denting plate alike. Yet instead of abandoning steel, armorers doubled down, literally, thickening breastplates and reinforcing helmets to withstand the thunderbolt of firearms. These proofed harnesses bore the scars of testing. A musket ball fired at point-blank range would lodge in the cuirass, flattened against the backplate, proving the suit's integrity before it ever saw battle. In the workshops of Augsburg and Milan, craftsmen experimented with compound laminations, inner plates of softer wrought iron to absorb shock, backed by hardened steel faces to deflect bullets. Cuirasses grew so heavy that knights often needed horses to help don them, the rounded buffet facing forward like a shield within a shield. Helmets evolved into shape-optimized global and frogmouth turnbacks, their sloping angles designed to glance shots away rather than receive them head-on. Yet, as defensive weight soared, mobility suffered. Field armies began to see a new class of light cavalry, reiters and hussars, eschew full harness for partial protection. A reinforced cuirass paired with a simple burgonet helmet, leaving arms and legs clad only in mail or padded cloth. These troops relied on speed, pistol volleys, and the caracole maneuver, circling the enemy to discharge shots, rather than relying on the brute shock of the lance charge. In response, parade armor emerged as both practical study and courtly spectacle. Magnificent suits, too heavy for war, were commissioned by Renaissance princes to showcase wealth and technical prowess. Polish white suits, gilded with etching of hunting scenes, hung in ducal armories as works of art. In Spain, Emperor Charles V's grand armourers crafted Maximilian-style harnesses, their fluted surfaces recalling Gothic forms but polished to a mirror sheen, and mounted on display horses for ceremonial entry. These ostentatious armours also served as laboratories for innovation. Artisans trialled new rivet patterns, secret internal springs for gauntlets to open more smoothly, and hidden joints that eliminated gaps at the underarm or groin. Engravers pushed acid etching techniques to unprecedented finesse, layering religious texts, family mottos, and allegorical figures into the metal. Armourers sometimes signed their work. Andrea Ferrara Fecit, etched beneath a winged victory, asserting both authorship and pride in this union of function and artistry. Meanwhile, battlefield realities continued to shift. Pike squares and musket battalions rendered heavy cavalry less central. Infantry armour lightened accordingly. Pikemen wore buff coats, thick leather jerkins sometimes reinforced with small iron plates, while musketeers wore only a breastplate and backplate. The classic three-piece cuirass remained standard, but helmets were reduced to simple morions or cabasses, trading facial coverage for unobstructed sight and hearing amid the roar of volleys and drum fire. By the close of the 16th century, armour had become a study in compromise, balancing protection against bullets with the necessity of movement, balancing the warrior's needs with the patron's desire for grandeur. Plate would continue to evolve, lighter, more articulated, more decorative, until, at last, the reign of firearms would render full harness obsolete on the battlefield. Yet the legacy of that steel-forged journey from crude hides to parade armor's finest engravings endures in museums and memorials, a testament to humanity's relentless drive to master both craft and conflict. As the 17th century unfolded, warfare's thunder grew ever louder, and plate armor's battlefield role diminished more rapidly than it had ascended. The thundering volleys of muskets and the precision of wheellock pistols rendered even the thickest proofed cuirass a fragile refuge. Yet metal did not vanish. It adapted. In the smoke-choked fields of 30 Years' War and English Civil War, cuirassiers charged in half-armoured splendour, breastplate and backplate gleaming beneath a broad-brimmed hat or pot-shaped helmet, their limbs swathed only in buff leather and stout cloth. Mail sleeves and gorgets lingered among junior officers, a nod to chivalric tradition, even as technology rendered those rings more decorative than defensive. The emphasis shifted. Protection focused on the torso, where a single shot could kill, while extremities sacrificed metal for weight savings. Meanwhile, cuirass makers in Paris and Madrid strove to preserve their craft by catering to civilian and ceremonial markets. The famous Fleury brothers of Paris fashioned breastplates stamped with Rococo scrollwork and floral arabesques for musketeer regiments whose commanders prized appearance as much as function. In Spain, Toledo steel, celebrated since the Middle Ages, was repurposed into ornate dress armor, cuirasses for noblemen's portraits, helmets worn only during bullfights, and parade harquebusiers' protections etched with scenes from Don Quixote's adventures. Across the English Channel, court masques and state occasions demanded armor that dazzled under torchlight. The Tower of London's Royal Armoury commissioned white harness trimmed in gold and silver plate, designed less to deflect blows than to display the monarch's magnificence. The Earl of Arundel's mask armour featured elaborately embossed figures of Neptune and Britannia, while King Charles I's own tournament harness was ornamented with ivory inlays and velvet linings. In Eastern Europe, Polish-Lithuanian winged hussars retained heavier harnesses longer than most. Their iconic back-mounted wings, attached to a male lamellar jerkin and solid cuirass, were as much psychological weapon as aerodynamic device, rustling like thunderbirds' feathers when charges formed. Though firearms steadily eroded cavalry's primacy, these winged riders, protected by forward-curving breastplates and reinforced gorgets, remained celebrated for their dramatic charges well into the mid-17th century. By the dawn of the 18th century, plate armor's martial decline was all but complete. Standard infantry discarded cuirasses altogether. Cavalry kept only the breastplate and helmet for shock troops, while dragoons and light horsemen rode bare-armed. Armourers turned their talents fully toward civilian markets, jewels, funerary effigies, diplomatic gifts, and the grand portraits that graced palace galleries. Yet even in obsolescence, the technology of armour found new life in the industrial age. Innovations in metallurgy, Bessemer's process, crucible steel, and advances in mass production spawned the next generation of protective gear. Bulletproof vests of layered silk and steel plates emerged in the 19th century, offering personal armor to couriers, journalists, and early motorists. Knights of industry adapted the medieval cuirass's lessons about layering and material science to guard against shrapnel and pistol fire in colonial campaigns and urban unrest. Long before European knights first bent their knee beneath Gothic cathedrals, and concurrently with the rise of mail and plate in the West, the great cultures of Asia were forging their own traditions of protective artistry, lamellar, mail, leather, and lacquered composites that reflected local materials, climate, and martial ethos. In this chapter, we trace the arc of Eastern armors from China's warring states through the samurai of medieval Japan, the elephant-barding courts of India, and beyond. Our story begins in ancient China, during the late centuries of the Eastern Zhou dynasty, when rival states warred incessantly for hegemony. There, in the arsenals of Chu and Qi, artisans experimented with small, overlapping scales of leather and bronze, lamellae, that they lacquered for hardness and waterproofing. Each scale, often dyed red or black, was tacked or laced onto silk backing in horizontal rows, so that the finished coat draped like fish scales, yet resisted both arrow and sword. Excavations at the tomb of the Marquis of Yi, c. 433 BCE, revealed a complete lamellar cuirass, its scales perforated with decorative motifs, flowing clouds, curling dragons, testimony to a warrior class who valued both protection and aesthetic harmony with nature. As the Qin dynasty unified the warring states, these scale armors became standardized among the terracotta ranks buried with Emperor Qin Shi Huang. Across thousands of clay warriors, we see male lamellar hybrids, collars of interwoven rings protecting the throat, skirts of iron lamellae shielding the hips, and helmets of hemispherical form, sometimes adorned with plume holders or animal crests. The Qin army's armor, though utilitarian, hints at a broader tradition. Leather craftsmen had long soaked hides in lacquer, sap distilled from the Toxicodendron vernicifluum, to craft shields and cuirasses that hardened into glossy, impervious shells. After the Han dynasty's consolidation, cavalry became preeminent on China's northern frontiers. Mounted riders adapted mailcoif and cuirasses, but also clung to lamellar scarves of leather and rawhide, light enough for swift maneuvers yet resilient against the steppe bow. In the crucible of the Three Kingdoms period, 220 to 280 CE, general craftsmen refined lamella into brigandines, small iron plates riveted between cloth layers, yielding a garment both flexible and repairable. Records from Wei and Jin court workshops note that brigandine tailors could replace damaged plates in the field, ensuring an army's armor remained serviceable through long campaigns. Meanwhile, in the island kingdom of Japan, Chinese and Korean techniques filtered across the sea. By the Kofun period, 3rd to 6th century CE, the earliest Japanese warriors, ancestors of the samurai, wore tanko and keiko armors, simple lamellar cuirasses of iron strips bound to leather, often worn over padded garments. The term oyoroi, meaning great armor, would emerge centuries later, but its roots lie in these prototypes. Early horsemen prized lamella for its balance of mobility and defense, critical on Japan's rugged terrain. As the Yamato court consolidated power, armorers in Kyoto and Nara blended indigenous craftsmanship with imported techniques. They refined lamella production, hammering and hardening plates of iron or steel until paper thin, perforating them along decorative borders, and then lacquering each plate in multiple coats of urushi. Silk cords dyed in vivid colors, crimson, deep indigo, or mustard yellow, wove the plates together in intricate lacing patterns called odoshi, creating armor that was as much ceremonial as martial. The helmet, or kabuto, took on iconic form, riveted iron plates fanning out like a crown, crowned by a crest box for family mon emblems, often flanked by stylized horns or antlers to inspire awe on the battlefield. By the Heian period, 794 to 1185 CE, samurai clanship had fostered regional styles. In the east, warrior houses favored heavy, box-like do-maru armors that wrapped around the torso in a single piece, secured with ties at the shoulder and waist. In the West, the lighter haramaki style, an open-backed cuirass, allowed rapid donning and doffing for sudden skirmishes. Both types integrated sleeves of mail, kusari, beneath lamellar shoulders, while thigh guards, kebiki odoshi, of leather scales protected the lower body. Masked men yoroi, fierce visages of lacquered leather and iron, concealed identity and struck fear into enemies, embodying the samurai's blend of artistry and terror. Concurrently, on the subcontinent of India, a divergent armor tradition flourished. Here, the wealth of elephant herds and wooded forests yielded materials and tactics unique to the region. Infantry and cavalry alike wore mail shirts of solid rings, some interlinked in alternating iron and brass for gleam, but upper echelons adorned steel cuirasses with sutta plates cut into lotus petal shapes, inlaid with gold and filigree. Under Mughal patronage, 16th, 17th centuries, the armorsmith's art reached Baroque heights. Chainmail of beads, where tiny spherical beads of steel formed a dense mesh, overlaid by laminated plates chased with battle scenes and Arabic inscriptions. Perhaps most distinctive was elephant barding, massive plates of leather and steel affixed to wooden frames draped over war elephants. The howdahs themselves, wooden towers atop the elephant, were flanked by tall steel shields, protecting commanders amidst the thunderous charge. In battle accounts from the Deccan armies, these lumbering war machines, armored like moving fortresses, decided the fate of sieges and open-field clashes alike. Further east, in the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, Burmese, Khmer, and Thai courts, metalwork blended with textile traditions. Cavalry wore iron lamellar cuirasses over silk tunics, each scale wrapped in silk thread to prevent rust and distress. Helmets often bore cloth covers dyed in royal hues, and neck guards of overlapping metal rings were seamed with gold embroidery, signifying rank. Archers, meanwhile, favoured leather brigandines reinforced at the chest and shoulders, allowing the full draw of the bamboo bow while safeguarding vital organs. By the late medieval period, trade along the Silk Road and maritime routes brought these Eastern armours into contact with Ottoman, Persian, and even Venetian markets. Arab chroniclers in the 15th century marvelled at Persian brigandines, combining Indian steel plates with Anatolian silk, while Ottoman Sipahi cavalry adopted the kalanswar, a mail and plate coat inspired by both Byzantine lamella and Mongol vast belts of plates. In court records, sultans gifted European envoys with lacquered Japanese helmets and Chinese dragon scales, tokens of esteem and symbols of the Sultanate's far-flung connections. As the gunpowder age spread across Asia from the 16th century onward, the continent's armoured traditions encountered a torrent of new influences, and in turn reshaped European styles in surprising ways. Portuguese carracks landing on Japan's shores in 1543 introduced matchlock arquebuses, prompting samurai to adapt their lamellar harnesses with reinforced steel plates over the chest and back. These tameshibiki test plates, proof marks showing a bullet flattened against the metal, became prestigious adornments, signaling that a suit had survived firearms trials. At the same time, Japanese armourers reversed the fluting principle of Milanese plates, carving vertical grooves into large do cuirasses to deflect bullets, while preserving the signature odoshi lacing and lacquered finish. In India, Mughal emperors eager to blend power with pageantry imported European fluted cuirasses and Mauryan helmets from Venetian workshops. Court armourers grafted these Western elements onto indigenous male lamellar coats creating hybrid turban helmet ensembles, breastplates over heavy chaftons, topped by tall, multi-plated turbans of steel that echoed Mughal textile wraps. These turbined helms, sometimes 3 to 5 overlapping domes of steel, protected against both blunderbuss fire and elephant-borne javelins, marrying form and function in imperial processions as much as on the battlefield. China, too, felt the cross-currents of global arms. Jesuit missionaries brought European cast breastplates, inspiring the Ming court to issue Portuguese-style cuirasses to elite bannermen. Yet local workshops countered the weight of massive Western plates by returning to lacquered iron lamellae, now glazed with chemical pigments for deeper blacks and reds, and integrating small, decorative riveted bosses in a manner reminiscent of Ottoman acorn boss mail. These boss lamella hybrid jackets provided a compromise: sufficient blunt force resistance, greater flexibility, and the unmistakable sheen prized by Qing mandarins in their elaborate military reviews. Meanwhile, Ottoman Sipahis confronted Venetian heavy cavalry across the Danube and Mediterranean coasts. They adopted the Western knight salet and bassinet helmets, adding their own quilted arming caps and mail aventales to preserve the full face protection of traditional turban helms. These Ottomanized salets, often plated with gold damascened floral motifs, would later inspire Mughal Nizam regiments to commission similar pieces for their imperial guard, circulating hybrid forms from Istanbul to Agra. In Southeast Asia, Dutch and British East India Company forces traded muskets for piratical Malay brigandines crafted of overlapping horn plates prized for their buoyancy and flexibility. European mercenaries hired to defend trading posts found themselves donning these indigenous armors, smoked, varnished, and stitched with brightly colored cotton, discovering that the Keats humid tropics favored lamella over cold-rolled steel. Word of Malay horn armor's lightness and resilience reached France and England, fueling experiments in impregnating leather with resins and horn dust to produce composite cuirasses suitable for colonial service in India and the Caribbean. These cross-cultural exchanges reached their apogee in the sprawling colonial armies of the 18th and 19th centuries. Sikh regiments in the British Indian Army wore mail lamella coats paired with European-style helmet towers, while Gurkha soldiers adopted lightweight brass breastplates modelled on Gur-e American battlefield trophies, blending Nepali Kukuri-friendly mobility with drilled steel protection. In North Africa, local tribal levies under French command were issued white-painted European cuirasses, only to decorate them with Tuareg-inspired blue indigo geometric stencils, merging imperial uniformity with nomadic artistry. As the 19th century unfolded, the legacy of ancient armors, lamella, mail, plate, lacquered composites, met the inexorable power of industrial age weaponry. Rifled muskets, breech-loading rifles, and high-explosive artillery shells sent metal shards and lead bullets hurtling through the air at unprecedented velocities. Entire regiments felt the ground shake under the roar of repeating rifles and cavalry charges, once the terror of the field became tragic spectacles against well-drilled infantry squares bristling with bayonets. Yet even as armor's battlefield role waned, its materials and principles found new purpose in the crucible of technological progress. In Europe's great arsenals, Krupp in Germany, Vickers in Britain, Schneider-Creusot in France, metallurgists experimented with steel alloys far stronger than any medieval armourer could have imagined. Soft iron gave way to high-carbon steels, chromed and nickel-plated for corrosion resistance. Face-hardened plates, forged under controlled heat and rapid quenching, offered the tantalizing promise of stopping small arms fire. Trials conducted by military commissions pitted revolver bullets and rifle rounds against steel plates of varying thickness, and while no human-sized harness could practically bear enough metal to stop a modern rifle, the data gleaned would inform designs for armored vehicles and fortifications. The Great War of 1914 to 1918 marked armor's most dramatic transformation. As infantrymen flooded the trenches under creeping artillery barrages, armies rushed to encase soldiers in personal protection once deemed impossible. Early flak jackets, cobbled from layers of silk and high-tensile steel wire, protected gunners and observers in the first armored cars and airplanes. On the Western Front, improvised trench shields, wooden slabs reinforced with salvaged boilie, and boilerplate defended sniper posts and machine gun nests, while survivors fashioned crude face masks from chopped-out pieces of helmeted steel, emblazoned with barbed wire patterns for grim effect. But it was the tank that would bear the true spirit of armoured warfare into modernity. In 1916, British engineers mounted steel plating onto tractor chassis, creating the first Mark I tanks that lumbered across no man's land. These behemoths, riveted, echoed the medieval cuirass in form, a mobile shell of iron, impervious to small arms fire, and capable of crushing barbed wire under their treads. By war's end, the Renault FT introduced the revolutionary concept of a fully rotating turret atop a steel hull, presaging the medium tanks that would come to dominate conflicts for decades. Between the wars, body armor found pockets of use. British police experimented with early ballistic vests for bomb disposal units. Soviet NKVD officers donned steel cuirasses beneath their greatcoats when escorting high-risk prisoners. Yet it was not until the Cold War, when helicopter Bahan ambushes, urban riot control, and guerrilla tactics forced soldiers into close quarters, that personal armor would regain prominence. In the 1960s, American scientists at the Ballistic Research Laboratories in Maryland began layering Kevlar fibers, a parachute-cord material first developed in the late 1950s, into woven vests that could stop pistol rounds and shrapnel while weighing only a few kilograms. Simultaneously, developments in ceramics led to hard armor plates that, when inserted into soft vests, could defeat high-velocity rifle bullets. Borrowing the principle of hardened faces and ductile backings, so central to flak jacket labs decades earlier, engineers fused alumina or boron carbide tiles onto flexible steel or polyethylene substrates. The result? Modular vests that combined the flexibility of medieval gambesons with the penetrating resistance of prismatic plate, an echo of coat of plates designs, now reborn in synthetic fibers and ceramic shards. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, personal protection diversified beyond the infantryman. Law enforcement officers across the world routinely wear soft armor beneath their uniforms. Bomb technicians don full body ensemble. Ensembles of aramid, ceramic, and steel, their silhouettes reminiscent of Crusader knights in sealed visors and heavy gauntlets. Special Forces operators, SEALs, SAS, Spetsnaz, flank ballistic plates with lightweight spool liners to catch ricochets, and integrate trauma pads to disperse blunt shocks, marrying medieval concepts of layered defense with cutting-edge materials science. Body armor's march continued into everyday life. Journalists entering conflict zones don vests rated to stop AK-47 rounds. Ambulance crews wear stab-resistant panels against edged weapon threats. Even drivers of armored limousines, once protected by layers of tempered glass and rolled homogeneous armor steel, benefit from transparent ceramic glass hybrids and ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene panels that are both lighter and stronger than traditional plate. Today, as nanotechnology and additive manufacturing mature, the future of armor glimmers with promise. Scientists weave carbon nanotubes into composite fabrics, seeking materials tougher than Kevlar, yet more pliant than silk. 3D printed metal lattices, inspired by the interlocking scales of ancient lamellar armor, could one day morph on the fly, stiffening upon impact like a Mesoamerican jaguar-scale cuirass, then relaxing for rapid movement. Smart armors, laced with sensors, may detect bullet strikes or near misses and stiffen accordingly, channeling impact forces away from vital organs, just as Greek fluting once guided sword cuts aside. In every age, armor and arms have danced an eternal waltz. As one side innovated a new defense, the other unleashed a weapon to break it. Having traced the slow accretion of steel, leather, and lacquer from the dawn of conflict to the modern battlefield, we now turn to the complementary story of offense, the evolution of weapons that drove and were driven by the quest for better protection. Chapter 4. Part 1 examines the earliest implements of war, from sharpened stones and wooden clubs to the first metal blades and projectile launchers, revealing how these simple tools compelled transformative leaps in armor design. The saga of weaponry begins with the improvisations of our Paleolithic forebears. In the dim glow of a flickering fire, early humans discovered that a flake of chipped flint, its edge sharpened by fracture, could slice bone and sinew more effectively than a raw stick. They learned to grind stones to points, mounting them on wooden shafts to fashion the first spearheads. These hand-hafted implements served dual roles, as thrusting weapons for close combat and as thrown projectiles to fell prey at a distance. The appearance of hafted axes, heavy stones affixed to handles, introduced brutal bludgeoning force, able to crush bone and shatter skulls, rendering soft hides and simple cloth virtually useless as defensive coverings. As groups migrated across continents, local materials shaped weapon forms. In forested regions, wooden clubs encrusted with embedded shards of bone or flint became favored close-quarters tools. In open grasslands, long wooden javelins, light enough to be hurled yet stout enough to pierce a charging aurochs, prevailed. These rudimentary weapons demanded only the lightest of protections, layers of hide to soften blows and wraparound pelts to prevent cuts. Early armors thus mirrored the weapons they faced, supple, layered, and easily repaired. The Neolithic Revolution brought a profound shift. As humans settled into agricultural villages, they began working with copper, the first metal to be smelted and cast. Copper axes, daggers, and mace heads appeared, their edges more durable and more lethal than stone. Defensive responses followed swiftly. Hardened leather jerkins soaked in oils and rows of bone or antler scales lashed to textile backings evolved to blunt copper's heavier impacts. Yet copper's softness meant it deformed on impact, limiting its effectiveness against tougher hides. Craftsmen soon experimented with adding tin to create bronze, a harder, more resilient alloy. Bronze Age warriors wielded slashing swords, spearheads, and arrow points cast in molds, their uniform shapes allowing mass production for the first time. The long, leaf-shaped bronze sword, its cutting edge tapered to a keen point, could slice through leather and cleave bone. Against these new threats, armourers thickened bronze scales and enlarged lamellae, experimenting with overlapping arrangements to deflect blows. Bronze helmets emerged, simple hemispheres of beaten metal covering the skull, sometimes adorned with cheek guards or neck flanges. These early helmets signaled the first marriage of weapon-driven need and protective innovation. Projectile weapons also advanced. The atlatel, or spear thrower, extended the effective range and force of wooden darts, while composite bows, crafted from wood, horn, and sinew, launched arrows with devastating velocity. Arrows tipped with bronze or flint could penetrate thick hides, prompting the development of cloth-based linothoraxes in the eastern Mediterranean, tightly layered linen quilts that absorbed and distributed arrow energy. These soft armors, often reinforced with bronze teruges, leather strips hanging at the shoulders and waist, demonstrated that protection need not be rigid to be effective. The advent of iron, around the first millennium BCE, revolutionized weapon design. Iron swords and spearheads, harder and sharper than bronze, proliferated across Europe, the Near East, and South Asia. Iron-tipped arrows gained unprecedented penetration, leading to a furious arms race, stronger bows, heavier arrows, and more resistant defenses. Iron helmets grew thicker, sometimes reinforced with central ridges to stiffen the crown. Mail, interlinked iron rings, emerged to counter slashing blades, its pliable mesh absorbing cuts that would have severed mail's Bronze Age counterpart. In parallel, engineers turned to siege warfare. Battering rams, massive beams swung against fortified gates, and torsion-powered artillery like the Greek oxybellies hurled stone bolts that shattered masonry. Siege towers rolled against walls, protected by wooden cladding and metal plates to guard operators from arrows. These machines, brutish and grand, underscored the symbiosis of offense and defense. As walls grew thicker and higher, siege engines grew more elaborate. As engines delivered heavier blows, defenders reinforced with metal plating and sloped stone to deflect impact. By the time of classical antiquity, the gladius and cyphus of Roman and Greek infantry had reached a high degree of refinement. Double-edged, thrust-oriented blades optimized for the close-quarters fighting of phalanx and cohort formations. These short swords excelled at stabbing through seams in scale and the underarms of mail shirts, spurring the addition of protective armpit plates, besagis, and reinforcing the linothorax with metal strips, evidencing how even minor vulnerabilities spurred targeted armor innovations. Concurrently, long-range warfare remained vital. The composite recurve bows of the Parthians, and then the steppe nomads, crafted from horn, wood, and sinew laminated in alternating layers, launched arrows capable of penetrating bronze and early iron armors. Armored cavalry, cataphracts, responded by donning full mail lamellar harnesses covering horse and rider alike, creating a battlefield spectacle of living tanks. Against this, heavy cavalry in the west fortified their own mail with hardened breastplates, marking the early integration of plate and mail tailored to blunt the impact of powerful horseback archery. The advent of true firearms in the late medieval period, matchlock arquebuses, wheel-lock pistols, and wrought iron or bronze breech-loading culverins, ushered in a seismic shift in the offense-defense balance. No longer did edges and points alone determine victory. Now, iron balls and powder charges dictated the pace of war, demanding a wholesale rethinking of personal and static protections alike. By the early 16th century, mercenary companies across Italy and Germany fielded arquebusiers whose serpentine matchlocks spat fire and lead. Their shots, though slow to reload and prone to misfires in damp weather, could punch through mail and thin splintered armor at moderate range. Armies responded by reinforcing the breast and back with proofed steel plates, thicker, curved, and often tested with a live shot pressed flat against the metal and left as a mark of quality. These proof marks became badges of honor on cuirasses, signaling that a soldier might weather the arquebus's thunder. Meanwhile, in the field, the combined arms of pike and shot rose to prominence. Spanish tercio formations, blocks of pikemen bristling at the center with arquebusiers on the flanks, demonstrated how coordinated fire and thrust could blunt cavalry charges. Armor for the pikemen lightened. Sallet helmets replaced great helms, leaving the lower face exposed for better vision and ventilation. Breastplates thinned to allow greater mobility within the dense pike ranks. Arquebusiers often wore only half armor, a burgonet helmet and simple breastplate, relying on drill, volley fire, and staggered reloading to compensate for lighter personal protection. Advances in wheel-lock mechanisms and eventually flintlock ignition improved reliability and rate of fire. Pistoliers and dragoons, mounted infantry armed with early carbines, traded heavy plate for buff coats, thick leather jerkins sometimes reinforced with small iron or brass plates sewn into the lining. This hybrid buff coat offered minimal bullet resistance, yet superior flexibility, crucial for quick dismounting, skirmishing, and the famed caracole tactics, curving in, wheeling out, and firing pistols in rotating ranks. In fortress and city defences, cannon and mortar fire shredded medieval walls, prompting engineers to adopt the Trace Italien system, low, angled bastions of earth and brick that could better absorb and deflect shot. Ramparts were faced with iron palisades and in key embrasures, small iron plates, gun shields, sheltered gunners from musketry. Inside, powder magazines were lined with copper to reduce sparking. Artillery crews donned thick leather aprons and leather-reinforced buff jackets to guard against flying metal and splinters. At sea, shipboard armor took on new dimensions. Deck crews and officers aboard galleons and ships of the line wore stout buff coats beneath canvas-reinforced breastplates. Helmets evolved into variant lobster-tail pot helmets, the rear scales protecting the neck from flung shot and boarding hooks. Gun ports were framed with sliding iron shutters that, when closed, transformed the wooden hull into a floating casemate able to withstand enemy broadsides. By the mid-17th century, as flintlock muskets replaced arquebuses and standard calibers brought consistency, military thinkers like Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden championed lighter, more maneuverable forces. His soldiers wore nothing heavier than a cuirass and helmet, marching rapidly in extended lines to deliver continuous volleys. Cavalry units paired armor back to a simple breastplate and buff coat, forsaking cumbersome limb defenses that would impede rapid charges and retreats. Concurrently, in East Asia, the Ming and later Qing dynasties imported matchlock rifles from Europe, integrating them with traditional lamellar and brigandine armors. Field tests showed that muskets could penetrate lacquered scales at close range, so Chinese artisans experimented with small, high-carbon steel plate inserts within lamellar jackets. These insert plates protected the chest and spine while leaving arms and hips clad in lighter scales, an echo of European partial harnesses, but executed with local lacquer and silk. By the dawn of the 18th century, the flintlock musket's ubiquity and the bayonet's invention rendered heavy personal armor nearly obsolete. Mass infantry advances in open order, delivered by disciplined volleys, made plate armor more hindrance than help. Cavalry charges, too, found new life as carbine-armed dragoons and lancers exploited mobility over protection. The breastplate persisted only among cuirassiers and elite guard units, polishing, gilding, and wearing it more as a badge of station than as true battlefield defense. With the flintlock musket and bayonet firmly established by the early 18th century, the artillery and small arms of war entered an era of rapid industrial innovation, one that would reshape both offense and defense on a global scale. In this final installment of Chapter 4, we trace how breech-loading rifles, repeating firearms, explosives, and mechanized weapons drove new leaps in armament and, in turn, spurred fresh responses in armor design. Breech-loaders and rifling. The mid-19th century witnessed the transition from muzzle-loading smoothbores to breech-loading rifles with rifle barrels. By cutting spiral grooves inside the barrel, gunsmiths imparted spin to projectiles, dramatically increasing range and accuracy. The British pattern, 1853 Enfield, and the French chassepot exemplified this shift, sending conical bullets flying past 1,500 yards with lethal precision. As volleys sheared through rank after rank, armies recognized that traditional smooth steel plates offered scant protection. Armies scrambled to field rapid manufacture body armor, though most experiments in Britain, France, and Prussia concluded that individual plate or mail harnesses remained too heavy to stop high-velocity rifled bullets. Instead, emphasis turned toward mobile cover, iron-plated gun carriages, armored horse artillery, and eventually steel-clad field wagons. Infantry learned to rely on earthworks, gabions, and trench systems, embracing protective layering of terrain rather than textile or metal worn next to the skin. Repeating arms and the Gatling gun, simultaneous advances in breech mechanisms and metallic cartridges enabled repeating rifles. Henry and Spencer models in American Civil War service delivered 7 to 10 shots before reloading. In parallel, Richard Gatling's 1862 prototype Gatling gun demonstrated the potential of mechanically fed, crank-driven rotary barrels capable of hundreds of rounds per minute. When unleashed against massed formations, these weapons turned cavalry charges into futile, tragic assaults. Defenders responded by deepening entrenchments, concealing sharpshooters, and deploying rapid digging tools so that even light infantry could erect makeshift steel shields. Cavalry units, once clad in breastplate and helmet, discarded all armor save leather jerkins, trading protection for the speed needed to evade streamgun fire. In colonial theaters, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, European troops sometimes wore laminated reed or buffalo hide jackets treated with iron flake, but these offered at best marginal resistance to repeating rifle rounds. The age of explosives and artillery. The development of nitrocellulose propellants and picric acid explosives in the late 19th century ushered in ever larger artillery, capable of hurling high explosive shells miles behind enemy lines. Fortresses once deemed impregnable, forts of Vauban's design, crumpled beneath sustained shelling. In response, engineers buried concrete and steel-reinforced casemates beneath earthen embankments, while siege batteries mounted armored turrets of face-hardened steel. On the battlefield, infantry adopted rudimentary steel helmets. Britain's 1915 Brodie helmet and Germany's Stahlhelm soon protected soldiers from shrapnel and shell fragments more effectively than any body-worn armor could guard against high-explosive concussive force. Tanks and armored vehicles were war. One's trench stalemate birthed the tank, a tracked, steel-hulled vehicle that restored mobility across shell-torn terrain. From the British Mark I to the French Renault FT, tank armor evolved through trial and error. Initially thin, 6 12mm steel plates, later increasing to 30mm or more as anti-tank rifles and larger guns emerged. Tank design balanced protection, firepower, and mobility. Sloped armor to deflect shells, internal sprung seats to cushion jolts, and rotating turrets to engage threats on all sides. Interwar developments refined armor alloys, face-hardened and homogeneous steels, while anti-tank guns prompted ever thicker plating. By World War II, medium tanks like the Soviet T-34 featured 45mm sloped front armor, while heavy tanks, German Tiger I with 100mm frontal plates, turned armored warfare into a decisive factor in combined arms operations. Personal armor in modern combat. Despite tanks and helmets, individual infantry body armor all but vanished in early world wars, deemed too cumbersome against rapid maneuvers. It was only in the late 20th century, spurred by urban warfare, helicopter gunships, and asymmetric threats, that personal armor resurged. The US PASGT vest of the 1980s, made of Kevlar 49 fibers, protected against shrapnel and low-velocity rounds. It laid the groundwork for modular plate carrier systems, where ceramic or steel plates rated to NIJ Level 3 could stop rifle rounds. Today's military vests combine woven aramids, e.g. Kevlar KM, Twaron, ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, e.g. Dyneema, and advanced ceramics, e.g. boron carbide, creating lightweight suites that protect torso, groin, shoulders, and even neck. Add-ons such as trauma plates, soft armor side panels, and integrated load-bearing web harnesses reflect the enduring principle of layered, targeted protection, an echo of medieval gambesons beneath plate. The future of defense. As small arms continue to evolve, electromagnetic railguns, caseless ammunition, smart munitions, researchers explore liquid armor, shear thickening fluids that harden on impact, textiles woven with carbon nanotubes, and exoskeletal frames that distribute weight and buffer shock. Sensors embedded in fabrics may one day mesh with battlefield networks, guiding medics to wounded soldiers and autonomously stiffening armor where impacts occur, long before the first sword rang on shield or the first cuirass gleamed in the sun. Armor carried significance beyond mere defense. It was a second skin that proclaimed a warrior's place in the world, a totem of identity, and a canvas upon which beliefs and aspirations were etched. In this chapter, we leave behind the purely technological story of steel and leather to explore the cultural and psychological dimensions of armor, how it shaped the rites of passage, the pageantry of power, and the inner lives of those who bore it. In many early societies, the act of donning armor was itself a ritual more sacred than any prayer. Among the Mycenaean palaces of the late Bronze Age, young nobles embarked on rites of passage that culminated in a trial of arms. Cloaked first in simple linen, they would step before their peers and take up helm and shield, fastening bronze greaves with trembling fingers. As the metal of their ancestors' spears glinted torchlight against palace stone, the novice was hailed as a warrior, transformed by the very weight and cold of the harness he put upon his flesh. Similarly, in the courts of the Hittite kings, ceremonial investiture involved a procession in full lamellar, scales of bronze threaded over leather, each plate stamped with the king's insignia. Priests anointed the cuirass with fragrant oils, recited ancestral incantations, and, by placing the helm upon the initiate's brow, seemed to confer not only protection, but a link to the divine. The sheen of metal became a mirror of cosmic order, reflecting stars and sunbeams alike, while the engraved reliefs of roaring lions and winged deities reinforced the wearer's bond to a world beyond mere mortality. Throughout the classical world, armor's iconography grew ever more elaborate. In ancient Greece, hoplite shields, round as the full moon and painted with gorgons, snakes, or geometric patterns, served as both practical protection and heraldic display. To carry one's shield into phalanx was to bear a personal emblem before the city's gods. To lose it was to forfeit honor and life. Historians record that when the Spartans fell at Thermopylae, those who dropped their hoplons were excluded from funeral rites, their bronze circles left abandoned on the field as grim symbols of shame. Rome elevated armor to state pageantry. On parade, legions marched in shining lorica segmentata and hammered helmets, their polished surfaces catching midday sun and proclaiming Rome's dominion. The standard-bearers, vexillari, emblazoned their banners with imperial eagles and Jupiter's thunderbolts, while the officers' engraved helmets bore scenes of Rome's mythic founding, Romulus and Remus suckling the she-wolf, Mars bestowing martial gifts upon the first king. These images bound soldier to state, reminding each man that his cuirass was more than protection. It was a pledge of loyalty to an empire he had sworn to defend. In medieval Europe, the knight's harness became theatre. Tournaments offered nobles a stage on which to display not only martial prowess, but heraldic identity. Surcoats and shields bore crests and colours that spoke of lineage, a griffin for courage, a rose for courtly love, a cross-patee for holy crusade. The process of tilting, the measured charge against a list barrier, transformed armour into a living costume. Its visors lifted to reveal masked and masked countenances, its cuirasses etched with romantic scenes drawn from Arthurian legend. Armourers worked in tandem with heralds and poets to ensure that each riveted scrollwork and each plume of ostrich feather served a narrative, connecting warrior to saga. Across the globe, similar themes emerged. In feudal Japan, the samurai's oyoroi was as much spiritual armor as martial gear. The odoshi lacing, cords dyed in family colors, bound steel plates and silk in patterns that echoed Buddhist symbolism. The interlaced diamonds of the hemp leaf warded off evil spirits. The dragon scale motifs called upon Ryujin's protection. Before battle, a samurai would pause at his front gate, offer prayers to household kami, then don each piece of lamellar in order: cuirass, kusazuri, kote, suniate, reciting silent oaths of loyalty to his lord and anticipating the ritual crossing of enemy lines. In South Asia, the Mughal noble's turban-helmet hybrid served as a statement of divine right. Worn atop a lamellar kurta and lavishly inlaid breastplate, the multi-tiered steel turban echoed the layers of authority granted by the emperor. Court ceremonies featured jeweled harnesses mounted on wooden horses, paraded through palace courtyards to the accompaniment of tabla and sitar, a spectacle reminding subjects that martial power and divine favor were inseparable. Even where armor faded from battlefield use, its symbolism endured. Renaissance princes commissioned parade armors festooned with allegorical reliefs. Mars enthroned amid captured monsters. Diana, the huntress stalking forest prey, aligning themselves with the virtues of strength, justice, and chastity. In Baroque courts, court masks saw courtiers don light cuirasses and velvet tunics, dancing elaborate choreographies that celebrated dynastic legitimacy more than martial might. By the time the musket relegated plate to pageantry, its role as emblem of power was firmly entrenched. Psychologically, armor offered both comfort and coercion. Soldiers reported the visceral reassurance of steel against heartbeat and breath. Its weight forced stillness at times of mortal fear, centering focus upon training and ritual rather than panic. Conversely, the very act of encasement created a detachment, a sense that the armored self was separate from the vulnerability beneath. Chroniclers of medieval warfare likened fully armored knights to living statues, their emotions hidden behind visored masks, their identities subsumed in anonymous ranks of gleaming steel. Armor has long demarcated not only warriors from civilians, but also drawn sharp lines of gender, class, and collective identity. In many cultures, the right to bear certain armors was jealously guarded, its ownership codified by law, custom, or ritual, and its appearance on the body declared one's place within a social hierarchy, gender and the girdle of steel. Though warfare was predominantly a male pursuit in most societies, there are notable exceptions where women donned armor to claim a warrior's mantle. Celtic queens such as Boudica are said to have led tribes into battle wearing male shirts and scale greaves, their gender eclipsed by the protective shells that rendered all who wore them as equals on the field. In Japan's Heian period, the Onamusha, female samurai, wore lighter lamellar kabuto and domaru, modified to allow for long hair and kimono sashes, and took up naginata in place of the heavier tachi. Their armor was often lacquered in subdued hues, deep indigo or forest green, to balance martial function with the aesthetics of femininity, illustrating that the protective arts could adapt to embrace female valor without sacrificing social expectations of decorum. Status and sumptuary steel. Across medieval and early modern Europe, sumptuary laws strictly regulated who could afford or legally wear plate armor. Only knights and nobles of sufficient rank could commission full harnesses. Lesser gentry were limited to brigandines or simple mail shirts. In Burgundy, an edict of 1433 forbade citizens of non-noble birth from wearing gilded or etched armor, under penalty of hefty fines. Similarly, in Mughal India, India, only high-caste warriors and courtiers could adorn the turban helm with precious gemstones or gold damascening. Soldiers of lower rank bore plain steel turbans and unadorned male lamellar kurtas. Armor thus became a visual shorthand for privilege, its materials and decoration communicating wealth, lineage, and proximity to power. Nationalism embodied in iron. From the 19th century onward, as the modern nation-state emerged, armor shed much of its battlefield utility, but became a potent symbol of collective identity. Prussian cadets in the early 1800s kept polished pickelhaube helmets as part of their dress uniform, the spiked crest marking the disciplined efficiency of the Zollverein state. In Victorian Britain, the household cavalry's gleaming cuirasses and plumed helmets stood for the empire's might. Their shining steel featured in countless paintings, postcards, and public pageants that nurtured patriotic fervor. Meanwhile, post-revolution France celebrated the cuirassier regiments of Napoleon's Guard. Their distinctive brass breastplates and bearskin caps immortalized in propagandistic art that fused military glory with national pride, ceremonial armor and civic ritual. Even when no longer worn in war, armor maintained a civic role. In Renaissance Florence, the gonfaloniere, chief, magistrate, rode in state procession wearing a parade harness encrusted with the city's emblematic fleur-de-lis and Medici crescents. In Edo, Japan, daimyo retinues paraded at Sankin-kotai processions in city streets, clad in ornate samurai armor, reaffirming fealty to the shogun and projecting collective unity. In modern times, state funerals in the United Kingdom feature mounted household division troopers in full dress armor, their polished breastplates and helmets linking contemporary ceremony to centuries of martial tradition. Armor as personal and collective memory. Within families and regiments, armor serves as heirloom and talisman. Scottish clans preserved ancestral claymores and mail shirts in stone keeps, invoking the deeds of forebears in ceremonies that blended ancestral worship with a martial remembrance. In the US, Civil War reenactment groups painstakingly replicate Union and Confederate breastplates and kepis, using these reconstructed armors to educate communities and honor collective memory of sacrifice. The feel of steel, the weight of a cuirass, becomes a tactile bridge to the past, an embodied history teaching lessons of courage, loss, and identity. At the heart of armor's power lies its psychological weight, both literal and metaphorical. Beyond the physical barrier it provides, armor shapes how warriors perceive themselves and their foes, how battles are fought, and how societies imagine the boundary between invincibility and vulnerability. The armored psyche. Slipping into a suit of plate or donning a lamellar jerkin transforms the wearer's sensory world. The clang of steel, the muffled rush of movement, the narrowing of vision through a visor, all recalibrate attention onto the task at hand. Studies of reenactors and modern armored combat practitioners reveal a heightened sense of focus. Each movement is deliberate. Every shift in balance weighed against the harness's bulk. Fear, too, is reframed. While a naked soldier recoils from the sting of a blade, the armored warrior feels the shock transmitted through the cuirass but lacks the visceral pain. That threshold, that moment of impact without immediate agony, can steel resolve, fostering the belief that one's defenses are unbreakable. Yet armor also imposes discomfort. Heat builds beneath layers of metal and padding. Weight saps stamina, joints stiffen. In medieval chronicles, knights praise their breastplates but lament the corseting grip of greaves and vambraces. Some carried iron gauntlets removed in camp, and helmets lifted or removed between bouts, lest the mind grow too muddled. Armor demands training and discipline, reinforcing martial hierarchies. Only those who mastered its burdens were deemed worthy to bear it in war and ceremony. Morale and the spectacle of steel. On the battlefield, armor projects confidence. A line of gleaming cuirasses advancing in unison can break an opposing force's will, even before weapons clash. Ancient sources recount the terror inspired by Sassanid cataphracts mirrored lamellar harnesses, reflecting sunlight in blinding bursts. Crusader chronicles describe how the sight of a knight in full white harness could send Saracen archers scattering, unnerved by the perceived invulnerability. In early modern Europe, the flash of polished breastplates and the thunderous roll of the cuirassier's charge, saber arcs gleaming, struck fear into infantry unaccustomed to such spectacle. Such morale effects were not lost on commanders. Philip II of Macedon had his phalanx bronze-scale shields burnished before battle. Charles V ordered his regiment's cuirasses to be repainted and varnished annually. Tokugawa Ieyasu mandated that each samurai's odoshi cords be renewed in vibrant colors, ensuring processions of armored retainers glowed like living rainbows of lacquered steel. Armor in these contexts became a tool of psychological warfare, an assertion that not only bodies but spirits could be armored against fear. Armor in art and literature. Armor's resonance extends far beyond the field of battle into the realms of art, myth, and collective imagination. Medieval romances teem with images of armored knights undertaking quests. Lancelot, Galahad, Don Quixote, all embodiments of the chivalric ideal that fuses martial virtue with moral purpose. In paintings from Paolo Uccello's The Battle of San Romano to Albrecht Dürer's engravings, the interlocking forms of plate and mail become compositional devices, their geometric lines directing the eye and symbolizing the order imposed upon chaos. In print and verse, armor serves as both metaphor and motif. Shakespeare's falcon-sharp imagery likens Caesar's ambition to a colossus, bridging the narrow world, his armor a symbol of unassailable might. In Japanese no-drama, masks and kabuto helmets represent supernatural forces. The painted steel of a samurai's kabuto can signify the presence of a kami, with the lacquered surfaces reflecting stage lights like hearth fires of legend. Modern media sustains these archetypes. Film and television lean on the iconography of armor to signal character. The pristine plate of a noble paladin, the battered mail of a seasoned mercenary, the black lacquered brigandine of a silent assassin. Video games map gameplay mechanics onto armor classes. Heavy plate grants high defense at the cost of speed, while light leather affords agility but little protection, continuing the narrative that what one wears shapes who one is. The paradox of protection. Yet armor embodies a paradox. By promising invulnerability, it can lure wearers into greater peril. A breastplate that turns aside a blade may encourage reckless charges. A helmet that muffles sound may compromise situational awareness. Military theorists from Vegetius to Clausewitz caution that reliance on physical defenses must be balanced with training, tactics, and adaptability. The samurai's ritual of armor inspection before battle. The medieval knight's arming days of practice. The modern soldier's drills donning body armor. These rites underscore that armor alone cannot win wars, but must be integrated into a broader martial discipline. Armor's enduring legacy. In today's world, where bulletproof vests replace chainmail and composite helmets, supplant steel morions, the symbolism of armor persists. Athletes wear armor, pads, helmets, guards, transforming fields and courts into modern arenas of protected violence. Protesters arm themselves with shields of plywood or metal, echoing the defensive phalanxes of antiquity. Even in business, armor appears metaphorically. Financial hedges, legal defenses, cybersecurity firewalls, all testify to our ongoing need to protect against threats, both physical and abstract. Ultimately, the story of armor is the story of humanity's confrontation with vulnerability. Through steel, leather, textile, and technology, we have sought to fashion barriers between ourselves and harm, to bargain with mortality by crafting layers of defense. But in doing so, we also craft identities, of warrior, of citizen, of individual, shaping cultures and beliefs around the palpable weight of protection. As long as danger exists, we will continue to don new armors, literal and figurative, believing that through ingenious layering and steadfast resolve, we can stand safe against the tumultuous currents of an ever-changing world. Long before the First World War saw the decline of plate on the battlefield, humankind had already begun to apply the principles of armor to non-combat arenas, crafting protective gear to guard laborers, athletes, and adventurers against the perils of their trades. In this chapter, we leave the warfields behind and follow the story of armor's civilian descendants. From the leather aprons of early blacksmiths to the advanced composite suits of firefighters, deep-sea divers, and astronauts. From tanner's hides to heavy metal aprons, one of the oldest civilian armors was born in the medieval tanneries, where hide workers wrestled raw skins into supple leather. To guard against knife slips and acidic tannin baths, tanners wrapped themselves in thick, untreated leather aprons that covered chest and thighs, often reinforced with multiple layers where tools and scrapers pressed hardest. These aprons, sometimes studded with metal rivets along stress points, echoed the gambeson's quilted layering, absorbing cuts and stings even as they bore the briar-like scratches of stretched hides. By the 17th century, European blacksmiths wore leather jerkins and iron-rimmed aprons to protect from sparks and hammer glances. The full-length blacksmith's apron, heavy cowhide dyed black to conceal scale and soot, became a symbol of the forger's trade, its weight a constant reminder of the red heat within the forge. Apprentices learned to brace against flying slag, turning bodies and faces away from the blow, trusting leather to shield them from scalding droplets. Industrial Revolution and the rise of hard hats. The 19th century Industrial Revolution transformed not only weapons, but also the hazards of civilian life. As factories hummed with steam engines and flying belts, workers faced crushing machinery and falling debris. The first hard hats appeared not in mines, but atop California's dam sites in the early 1910s. Leather caps riveted with metal plates to guard against rockfall. Soon, these evolved into aluminum-rimmed helmets, and by the 1930s, into molded Bakelite shells. The Boston manufacturer Edward Dickinson patented the hard-boiled hat, a laminated cork and canvas headgear that dampened impacts and resisted sparks. By mid-20th century, plastic injection molding birthed the modern high-density polyethylene hard hat, complete with adjustable suspension systems that cradled the skull and dispersed downward forces. Construction, mining, and factory workers adopted these luminous domes, yellow, white, or orange, becoming as iconic to the skyline as the steel girders they helped erect. Sports armor, from leather caps to Kevlar pads. While combat armor aimed to stop weapons, sports armor seeks to mitigate accidental impacts. In early 19th century England, cricket batsmen wore minimal protection, a long coat and gloves, until John Lomas's 1849 invention of a padded gloves and arm guard encouraged wider adoption. By the 1920s, rugby union forwards donned leather headgear, scrum caps, stitched with dense wool padding to prevent abrasions and cauliflower ear, though their effectiveness against concussions remained limited. The mid-20th century saw revolutionary advances. American football introduced plastic shell helmets lined with foam, shifting from soft leather to rigid polycarbonate capable of withstanding significant impacts. Catchers in baseball adopted chest protectors and shin guards inspired by medieval brigandines, flexible louved plates sewn into fabric mantles, enabling crouching behind a home plate while deflecting foul tips. Ice hockey's evolution from bamboo sticks to steel blades paralleled the rise of molded plastic helmets with integrated face cages and body pads of layered foam and plastic shells that permitted both mobility and high-velocity collisions. Most recently, materials such as Kevlar, D30TM, polymers, and carbon fiber have filtered into protective gear. Motorcyclists wear textile jackets reinforced with hard-shell shoulder and elbow caps. Mountain bikers slide into back protectors composed of shock-absorbing foam. Equestrian vests use ballistic-grade fabrics to shield riders from kicks and falls. Each innovation draws on armor's ancient lessons: layering, strategic reinforcement, and the dispersion of force across a wider area. Deep-sea and hazardous environment suits, beyond impacts, humanity has sought armor against thermal, chemical, and pressure extremes. The first atmospheric diving suits of the late 19th century, rubber-coated canvas with articulated metal joints, enabled brief excursions to depth, yet were so bulky that divers moved as if encased in medieval plate. The 1930s Iron Mike suit, constructed from welded steel and braced with internal ballast, allowed engineers to inspect ship hulls and salvage wrecks at greater depth, its round viewport reminiscent of a great helm's narrow eye slit. Chemical protection spurred the development of fully encapsulating suits, rubber-coated fabrics impervious to acids and solvents, with self-contained breathing apparatus delivering air through reinforced hoses. Firefighters, too, traded woolen tunics for aluminized proximity suits in the 1960s. Multi-layered garments of aramid fibers and aluminized jackets that reflect radiant heat, guarding against flash fires and extreme temperatures. Modern turnout gear combines moisture barriers, thermal liners, and abrasion-resistant outer shells, offering a balance of weight and protection that would astonish medieval blacksmiths. The spacesuit, armor for the final frontier. If armor is protection from harm, then the ultimate armor is the spacesuit, cradling life within a hostile vacuum. NASA's first extravehicular mobility unit, EMU, in the 1960s, comprised multiple pressure garments, an inner nylon long john for moisture management, an intermediate neoprene-coated nylon bladder maintaining 1/5 of Earth's atmospheric pressure, and an outer thermal micrometeoroid garment of aluminized mylar and dacron. Layers of beta cloth, Teflon-coated glass fiber, guarded against micrometeoroids, tiny orbital particles that strike at hypervelocity, capable of pitting metal if unshielded. The suit's rigid fiberglass torso resembled a cuirass, its segmented joints allowing bending at the hips and shoulders. Visor assemblies of gold-coated polycarbonate mirrored the reflective surfaces of cavalry breastplates, deflecting solar radiation while granting the astronaut a panoramic view. Life support backpacks, the oxygen bottles of history, harnessed cooling water lines, CO2 scrubbers, and electrical systems, echoing the steel-clad power packs of industrial miners, yet oriented toward sustaining biology in the void, toward modular, adaptive protection. Today's civilian protective systems increasingly mirror military modularity. SWAT teams and riot police wear plate carriers with interchangeable soft armor panels, helmet shells that accept ballistic visors and communication modules, and tactical gloves reinforced with carbon fiber knuckles. Industrial exoskeletons, currently in prototype, promise to reduce physical strain akin to the articulated lames of medieval leg harnesses, by transferring load from muscles to frame. Meanwhile, 3D printing and smart materials are enabling rapid fabrication of custom-fit shells, protective gear tailored not only to the wearer's dimensions, but to the precise risk profile of the task at hand. Beneath every suit, shell, and vest lies a tale of material alchemy, of chemists, metallurgy, and engineers coaxing new properties from fibers, ceramics, and metals to meet the ever-evolving demands of protection. In this part, we trace how breakthroughs in polymers, high-performance ceramics, and composite architectures have redefined civilian armor for the modern age. Aramid fibers and the birth of soft armor. In the 1960s, chemist Stephanie Kwolek at DuPont discovered Kevlar, a polyphenylene terephthalamide whose long, rigid molecules align under tension to form exceptionally strong, high modulus fibers. Woven into tightly packed fabrics, Kevlar could absorb and dissipate the kinetic energy of shrapnel and low-velocity projectiles by forcing bullets to deform and spread their force across many filaments. The first helmets and vests lined with Kevlar fabric offered improved flexibility and wearer comfort compared to steel, inaugurating an era of soft armor that traded bulk for stealthy concealment under civilian clothing. Ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, UHMWPE. Building on the principle of high tensile fibers, engineers introduced UHMWPE, branded as Dyneema or Spectra, in the 1980s. These long-chain polyethylene fibers boast a molecular weight millions of times that of typical plastics, producing a crystalline, highly oriented structure that rivals steel in tensile strength, yet floats on water. Woven UHMWPE panels are now staples in motorcyclist jackets, ballistic shields, and cut-resistant gloves, offering remarkable puncture resistance and lightness even in larger formats. Their low density also makes them ideal for diving knife handles and underwater cutting tools, where corrosion resistance and buoyancy matter. Ceramic strike plates and hard armor inserts. To counter high-velocity rifle rounds, soft fiber layers alone proved insufficient. The solution arrived in the form of ceramic plates, tiles of alumina, silicon carbide, or boron carbide, bonded to fiber backings. On impact, a bullet's kinetic energy fractures and erodes the hard ceramic face, dispersing the force laterally, while the backing fibers catch residual fragments. Modern plate carrier vests mix and match materials, lightweight polyethylene spall liners for multi-hit capability, ceramic faceplates for stopping power, and flexible fiberglass sheets for trauma reduction, tuning protection levels for law enforcement, military, or bomb squad applications, metal matrix, composites, and advanced alloys. In industrial settings requiring extreme cut or crush resistance, mining, demolition, and heavy fabrication, composite metals have come to the fore. Tool steels infused with tungsten carbide particles achieve surface hardness above 70 HRC, protecting against grinding sparks and arc flashes. Aluminum lithium alloys used in aerospace-grade helmets and riot shields combine low weight with high yield strength. Emerging metal matrix, composites, aluminum reinforced with ceramic whiskers or carbon nanotubes, promise next-generation riot visors and breaching shields that resist both ballistic and blunt impacts. Layered hybrid systems. Most contemporary protective gear is not a single material, but a judicious layering of dissimilar elements. Firefighters' proximity suits, for example, stack an outer aluminized radiation barrier over an aramid flame-resistant layer, themselves backed by moisture barriers and thermal liners. Each stratum addresses a specific hazard: radiant heat, flame, moisture, mechanical abrasion, yet together they maintain flexibility and breathability. Similarly, tactical plate carriers integrate moly webbing for modular attachment, hard armor pockets for ceramic or polyethylene plates, and breathable mesh liners to wick sweat during extended wear. Smart materials and adaptive armor. The frontier of protection lies in materials that respond dynamically to threats. Shear thickening fluids, STFs, suspensions of silica nanoparticles in polyethylene glycol, behave like liquids under slow deformation, but solidify upon high-speed impact, offering potential for flexible, low-profile stab and ballistic-resistant fabrics. Electrotextiles woven with piezoelectric fibers can detect and localize impacts, transmitting data to heads-up displays or medical monitors. Shape memory alloys, nickel-titanium wires embedded in composite shells, could stiffen under electrical stimulus, instantly increasing rigidity in vulnerable zones. Additive manufacturing and custom-fit 3D printing has revolutionized prototyping and production of protective gear. From lattice-structured helmet shells optimized for impact dispersion to personalized orthotic liners that match an individual's exact cranial geometry, additive manufacturing enables bespoke armor. Rapid iteration cycles mean civilian responders can test and refine designs in weeks rather than years, tailoring the balance of weight, coverage, and mobility to the specific risks of deep-sea rescue, crowd control, or extreme sports. Sustainability and the next generation. As environmental concerns mount, researchers seek bio-based and recyclable alternatives. Polymers derived from lignin or recycled PET bottles are under study for ballistic fabrics. Ceramic matrix composites incorporating agricultural waste fibers aim to reduce carbon footprint. The challenge is to maintain or surpass current performance metrics: tensile strength, energy absorption, durability, while closing the life cycle loop. In doing so, civilian armor of the future may not only shield lives, but also steward the planet. Any suit of armor, be it medieval plate, Kevlar vest, or deep-sea diving rig, is only as effective as the human inside it. In this final section of Chapter 6, we explore the soft dimensions of protection, how ergonomics, usability, maintenance, and organizational practices determine whether armor saves lives or hinders those who depend on it. Ergonomics and fit, a cuirass that pinches the ribcage, or a helmet that rocks on the head, can distract, fatigue, and in extreme cases cause injury. Modern protective gear leverages anthropometric data, detailed body measurements from diverse populations, to offer multiple shell sizes and adjustable suspension systems. Soft liners conform to contours, adjustable straps balance tension, and modular padding lets wearers fine-tune the fit. In tactical plate carriers, cummerbunds cinch the sides. Shoulder pads shift center of gravity. Quick-release buckles allow rapid doffing under fire. Even firefighter turnout coats use stretch panels and adjustable suspenders to accommodate chest expansion under exertion and heavy breathing. Mobility versus coverage. Complete encasement offers maximal protection, but can cripple motion. Designers must balance coverage with freedom of movement. In sports, segmented padding and articulated joints allow running, twisting, and tackles. In law enforcement, cutaway vests protect vital organs while leaving arms and legs unencumbered. In industrial helmets, chin straps and internal straps allow head tilt without sacrificing stability. Motion capture studies guide the shaping of gauntlets and greaves, ensuring workers can grip, crawl, or climb. The key is strategic reinforcement. Armor where needed, flexibility where possible. Thermal regulation and comfort armor traps heat and moisture. Without breathability, users risk overheating, dehydration, and loss of performance. Civilian protective systems integrate moisture-wicking liners, mesh vents, and phase-change materials that absorb or release heat to maintain a tolerable microclimate. Firefighter suits combine outer aluminized shells with vapor-permeable membranes. Sports helmets use dual-density foam with airflow channels. Tactical helmets offer removable sweatbands and clip-in cooling pads. Proper climate control extends wear times and reduces the temptation to remove armor in dangerous situations. Maintenance, inspection, and life cycle. Even the toughest material degrades with use. Cracks in ceramic plates, frayed aramid fibers, corroded metal joints, all threaten performance. Effective armor programs establish regular inspection intervals, visual checks for wear or damage, drop tests for helmets, ballistic retesting for vests, repairable systems, rifle plates with replaceable strike faces, diving suits with patch kits, modular padding, prolong service life and reduce waste. Clear documentation of inspection results and replacement schedules ensures that no vest or shell remains in service. 10. Past its safe lifespan. Training and habit formation. Armor can only protect if it is worn correctly and consistently. Organizations invest in training to instill proper donning and doffing procedures, emergency removal drills, and integration of armor into everyday routines. Military units rehearse under load, acclimating soldiers to carry banks of magazines, radios, and hydration systems alongside their body armor. Fire brigades conduct rapid gear-up competitions to sharpen speed. Sports leagues mandate helmet fit checks by certified staff before every game. These habits transform protective equipment from an afterthought into an automatic element of readiness. Psychological acceptance. Users' attitudes toward armor influence its use. If gear feels cumbersome, stigmatized, or uncomfortable, compliance plummets. Engaging end users in design, through focus groups and field trials, yields insights into preferred aesthetics, weight thresholds, and functional priorities. Customized color panels for police vests, sleek helmet silhouettes for motorcycle riders, and lightweight turnout hoods for paramedics all reflect this user-centered ethos. When wearers feel that their protection respects their needs and identities, they are far more likely to trust and rely on it. Organizational and regulatory frameworks, helmet standards, e.g. DOT, ECE for motorcycle headgear, body armor ratings, NIJ levels, and workplace safety regulations establish baseline requirements. Compliance audits, accreditation programs, and third-party testing labs enforce these standards. In corporate or municipal settings, safety officers manage inventories, certify equipment, and investigate incidents of failure. Insurance incentives and liability concerns further drive organizations to adopt rigorous protective gear policies, embedding armor within broader safety ecosystems. Future directions in human factors. Emerging research explores adaptive systems that respond to physiological signals, heartbeat, body temperature, muscle fatigue, and adjust stiffness or airflow in real time. Haptic feedback embedded in helmets can warn soldiers of obstacles. Smart garments may monitor vital signs and alert medics to heat stress or impact arms injuries. Virtual reality simulations train users under realistic loads, optimizing fit before the first field deployment. As these technologies mature, the line between wearer and armor blurs. Protection becomes an active partner in human performance and well-being. In the wake of an age defined by steel and fiber, by tanks and spacesuits, the 21st century presents new arenas in which humanity must armor itself. Realms not of blade and bullet, but of bits and biology, of social cohesion and digital trust. In this chapter, we explore how the millennia-old principles of layering, force dispersion, and adaptable form find fresh expression in cyberspace, in synthetic biology safeguards, and in the resilience of communities facing modern hazards. Digital mail, firewalls, encryption, and layered defenses. Just as a mail shirt distributes the force of a sword across thousands of small rings, so too do modern networks rely on many overlapping security measures to resist cyber attack. The firewall, once a simple packet filter at the network border, has evolved into a multi-layered gateway, application-aware inspection, intrusion prevention systems, and sandboxed virtual environments working in concert to detect and deflect threats. Encryption protocols, akin to hardened plate, cloak data in mathematical armor. AES and RSA algorithms transform plain text into ciphertext that, without the proper key, can no more be read than a medieval breastplate could be pierced by bare hands. Beyond the perimeter, endpoint security agents, antivirus, anti-malware, and behavioral monitoring tools embroider each device with protective stitches, identifying anomalous processes and quarantining them before they can spread. Just as plate armor leaves gaps at joints, Gambison-protected areas, modern defenses recognize that human factors and misconfigurations create soft spots that require constant monitoring, patch management, and user training to seal against phishing and social engineering blows. Zero trust as articulated plate. In environments of persistent threat, the zero trust model has gained currency. Here, no entity is implicitly trusted. Every access request is evaluated, every credential re-verified, and every session continuously observed. The analogy to articulated plate is clear. Overlapping lames guard each limb in isolation, so that even if one section is breached, neighboring plates contain the damage. Microsegmentation divides networks into granular segments, limiting lateral movement of attackers, much as cuirassiers' segmented arm harnesses constrain an enemy's cut to a single joint, rather than the entire arm. Synthetic biology, bioshields, and layered immunity. As our technological reach extends into the realm of living systems, new forms of armor must protect against biological threats, whether naturally emerging pathogens or engineered agents. The human immune system itself is an ancient suit of layered defenses, skin and mucous membranes forming the first barrier. Innate immunity, providing rapid, non-specific alarms, and adaptive immunity, B and T cells, crafting custom-fit antibodies against recognized invaders. Building on this template, synthetic biologists design bioshields to augment or replace these natural layers. mRNA vaccine platforms, perfected during the COVID-19 pandemic, act like custom-forged plate inserts. They deliver precisely coded genetic instructions that train the adaptive immune system to recognize new viral spike proteins effectively hardening the host against specific threats within weeks of deployment. Broad-spectrum antivirals and monoclonal antibody therapies function as mobile reinforcements, circulating through the body to intercept pathogens before they bind and penetrate cells, chemical equivalents of interlocking rings that trap or slow down incoming projectiles. On the external front, engineered skin mimetic materials promise wearable biosensors capable of detecting pathogenic signatures in real time. Wearable bio-armor that alerts the wearer to biological hazards in the environment. Embedded microfluidic channels coated with nucleic acid probes change color or transmit data when they bind to bacterial endotoxins or viral RNA, much as a knight's gorget might signal a compromised throat guard by discoloration under chemical attack. Societal resilience, civic armor, and community defense. No individual, however armored, stands alone. The concept of societal resilience mirrors the mutual protection of a shield wall. Neighbors, institutions, and social networks form interlocking defenses that can absorb shocks, natural disasters, economic downturns, or civil unrest, and recover more quickly. Disaster preparedness programs, public health surveillance, and mutual aid networks are the structural beams and rivets of the civic harness, ensuring that if one sector buckles, others bear the load. Consider urban flooding. Engineers build levees, retention basins, and green infrastructure sacrificial zones to divert excess water. Hard armor barriers complemented by softscape buffers that absorb and dissipate floodwaters. Early warning systems and evacuation drills drill citizens in rapid donning habits, echoing military arming days, so that when the alarm sounds, evacuation becomes an automatic, practiced motion. Communities that cultivate social capital, trust, mutual aid, shared information, create a collective cuirass against panic and misinformation, ensuring that accurate guidance spreads as reliably as a chainmail hauberk deflects sword thrusts. Digital civics, protecting the commons in the information age. Disinformation and online harassment threaten the cognitive armor of individuals and democracies. Fact-checking organizations, platform moderation policies, and media literacy education function like layered defensive fabrics. Pre-publication filters, analogous to gambesons, catch false claims early. Post-publication review and public correction, like inspection and repair of armor, help seal breaches, and community norms enforce standards of civility, discouraging corrosive damage to the public discourse. Furthermore, decentralized technologies, blockchains, distributed ledgers, offer new armor for critical data and transactions. By replicating information across many nodes and requiring consensus for changes, these systems mirror the redundancy of scale armor. If one plate or node fails, the intact neighbors maintain structural integrity, preventing a single point of compromise. The human element, training and culture. Just as plate and mail required rigorous training and ritual to wield effectively, these modern arms and armors demand continuous education, simulation exercises, and cultural reinforcement. Cybersecurity drills, red teaming exercises, stress test defenses under realistic attack scenarios, public health tabletop exercises, rehearse pandemic responses. Civic hackathons nurture citizen engagement in designing resilient solutions. These practices create muscle memory, ensuring that in moments of crisis, responses are deliberate, coordinated, and effective. Towards integrated survival systems, the future will likely see tighter integration of physical, digital, and biological defenses into unified survival systems. Wearable health monitors might link through secure personal area networks to public health infrastructures. Adaptive firewalls could receive real-time threat intelligence from field sensors. Community apps might coordinate shelter-in-place orders with utility grid load balancing. In such converged environments, the principles of armor, layering, redundancy, adaptability, will guide holistic designs that safeguard individuals, organizations, and societies against threats as diverse as malware and megastorms, as microscopic as viruses, and as abstract as disinformation. As we layer digital firewalls and biological bioshields, and weave civic networks into resilient chains, we must ask, who benefits from these armors, and at what cost? In this part, we confront the ethical and social dimensions of modern protection, examining the balance between security and freedom, the danger of defensive technologies entrenching inequality, and the imperative that our armor serve all members of society rather than only the privileged few. Security versus privacy. Every firewall and intrusion detection system, every biometric checkpoint and body scanner trade some degree of personal privacy for collective security. In the name of protecting critical infrastructure, governments deploy network-wide packet inspection that can flag anomalous traffic, but also capture sensitive personal data. Likewise, airports and public buildings increasingly require face recognition or fingerprint scans, technologies that, once deployed, risk mission creep, stored indefinitely, repurposed without consent, or breached by malicious actors. The ethical challenge is to architect these cognitive armors with transparent rules and strong oversight, data minimization principles, strict limits on retention and sharing, and robust audit trails. Just as medieval knights were bound by codes of chivalry, even as they bore weapons and defenses, modern defenders must pledge to uphold civil liberties even while safeguarding the commons. The digital divide and armor inequality. Advanced protective technologies, state-of-the-art cybersecurity tools, wearable health monitoring devices, nanomaterials for personal armor, often reach only affluent organizations and individuals. Small non-profits, rural clinics, and under-resourced schools may lack the budgets and expertise to deploy essential digital defenses or biosurveillance. In crisis zones, the poorest communities can be the last to receive vaccines engineered via mRNA platforms, even though those same platforms rely on armor concepts of layered immunity. Left unchecked, this armor gap deepens social inequalities, rendering marginalized populations more vulnerable to cybercrime, pandemics, and climate disasters. Ethical deployment demands subsidized access, open-source toolkits, and capacity-building programs that diffuse protective innovations across all strata. Only by democratizing armor, physical, digital, and biological, can we ensure collective resilience. Over-engineering and unintended consequences. In our zeal to armor every vulnerability, we risk creating defenses so complex that they become brittle or opaque. Deep neural network firewalls can detect novel malware, but their inscrutable decision-making black boxes make it difficult to diagnose false positives or correct bias. Smart fabrics embedded with sensors may guard against chemical exposure, yet raise questions about constant health monitoring. Who owns that data? Could employers mandate its use or penalize workers for readings that fall outside ideal ranges? Responsible design must anticipate these trade-offs, Ethical armor embraces simplicity where possible, favors explainability over inscrutability, and embeds kill switches or user-controlled overrides. As with plate armor's articulated rivets and detachable components, designed for both rigidity and repair, modern protective systems should allow users to inspect, test, and, when necessary, disable components that infringe on autonomy. Militarization of civil spaces, police forces, equipping themselves with armored vehicles, drone fleets, and militarized gear may deter violence, yet also risk transforming civic spaces into theaters of war. Armored police vans and high-caliber weaponry can escalate confrontations, erode public trust, and chill legitimate protest. The optics mirror medieval castle defenses that offered safety behind walls, but could isolate and oppress those outside them. Ethical governance requires strict civilian oversight, clear rules of engagement, and community input before deploying heavy protective technologies, just as medieval cities held councils to approve new fortifications, lest lords build walls that suffocated trade and dissent. Modern democracies must ensure that armor for public safety enhances rather than constricts civic life. Environmental and life cycle ethics, advanced materials, ceramic plates, aramid fibers, exotic alloys, often demand energy-intensive production and can be difficult to recycle. As body armor, riot shields, and hard hats reach their end of life, they may contribute to hazardous waste streams. The ethical imperative extends beyond performance. We must design armor for sustainability, employing recyclable composites, biodegradable polymers, and closed-loop manufacturing. Parallel to medieval smiths who repurposed scrap iron into new harnesses, today's designers can integrate reclaimed fibers and recovered metals into protective gear. Life cycle assessments and environmental impact audits should be as standard as ballistic testing or flame resistance ratings. Inclusivity and cultural sensitivity. Protective gear that clashes with cultural or religious norms can hinder adoption. Helmet chin straps that interfere with head coverings, body vests that conflict with modest dress, or biometric scanners that fail to recognize diverse skin tones, all exemplify design blind spots. Such mismatches can exclude entire communities from the benefits of modern armor. Inclusive design engages diverse stakeholders from the outset: women, first responders, faith-based groups, indigenous communities, ensuring that protective equipment accommodates varying body types, cultural practices, and language needs. Training materials and maintenance instructions should be available in multiple languages and formats, reducing barriers to effective use. Ethics of autonomous defense. Increasingly, armor and defense systems incorporate autonomous elements: AI-powered network monitors, drone swarms for area surveillance, robotic bomb suits that evaluate threats before sending humans in. While these promise to shield operators from danger, they also raise profound questions. Who is accountable when an autonomous guard misidentifies a threat or causes collateral damage? Does delegation to machines diminish human judgment in critical moments? Ethical frameworks for autonomous armor must mandate human in the loop or human on the loop controls, clear rules of accountability, and real-time audit logs, just as medieval knights bore the moral weight of their allegiances and oaths. Modern technologists and commanders must accept responsibility for every automated decision their systems make. The imperative of shared stewardship. Ultimately, armor, whether of steel, fiber, code, or community, cannot be a private endeavor. It thrives only when shared, maintained, and governed collectively. The medieval guild system of armorers, in which masters trained apprentices and upheld communal standards, offers a model. Protective technologies flourish when crafted within accountable institutions that combine expertise, ethics, and public service. Today's armor guilds may take the form of interdisciplinary coalitions, cybersecurity alliances that share threat intelligence, international vaccine pacts that ensure equitable distribution, community resilience networks that coordinate disaster response. By embedding protective innovations within transparent, inclusive, and cooperative structures, we honor the ancient spirit of armor, not as a tool of domination, but as a bulwark of solidarity, as we stand at the cusp of a new era, where threats range from quantum-powered cyber attacks to engineered pandemics, from artificial intelligences to deep space hazards. The ancient art of armor must once again evolve. In this final section, we cast our gaze forward, surveying cutting-edge materials, emerging defense paradigms, and the frontiers, virtual, microbial, and cosmic, where humanity will don its next generation of protective craft. Nanostructured and metamaterials researchers are engineering materials at the atomic scale to achieve properties once thought impossible. Nanocomposites, blending carbon nanotubes, graphene sheets, and polymer matrices, promise fabrics that self-heal micro-tears, much as biological tissue regenerates. Metamaterials, whose internal architectures bend waves of light, sound, and even seismic energy around objects, suggest cloaking applications, buildings that remain impervious to earthquakes, helmets that dissipate concussion-causing shockwaves, and sensors that render critical infrastructure invisible to destructive probing. These innovations build upon the principle of layering and geometry that hallmarked medieval fluting and Renaissance etching, yet extend protection into realms of physics previously inaccessible. Programmable, adaptive armor systems, drawing inspiration from biology's dynamic defenses, clamshells that stiffen under pressure, sea cucumbers that harden their tissues on demand. Engineers are developing armor that actively senses and responds to threats. Embedded networks of microfluidic channels can circulate magnetoheliological fluids, adjusting viscosity in milliseconds to stiffen panels against incoming projectiles. Conductive polymers woven into textiles may redistribute electrical charges to neutralize electroexplosive warheads or discharge static buildup for electronic warfare environments. These smart armors represent the ultimate fusion of form and function, garments that reconfigure their properties on the fly, much as a samurai's layered lamellae could flex in one moment and lock in the next. Quantum and biocyber defense. In the digital domain, quantum key distribution offers theoretically unbreakable encryption, underpinning the digital cuirass of state-level communications. Nevertheless, quantum-capable adversaries threaten to render current public key infrastructures obsolete, driving research into post-quantum cryptography and distributed ledger technologies that can survive in a world of entangled eavesdroppers. At the biological interface, synthetic gene drives and CRISPR-based antivirals are being explored as preemptive genetic armors against emerging pathogens, programmed to patrol cellular genomes and neutralize viral intruders before they can replicate. Yet these powerful tools raise profound governance questions: how to ensure they shield humanity without leaking into ecosystems as unintended weapons, spaceborne, and planetary protection. As commercial and governmental ventures push deeper into space, armor must guard both hardware and life against cosmic perils. Micrometeoroid and orbital debris shields, multi-layered Whipple bumpers of sacrificial panels and honeycomb structures stand between spacecraft and high-velocity impacts. Radiation protective fabrics, infused with hydrogen-rich polymers or embedded with boron compounds, help mitigate solar flare storms and galactic cosmic rays for astronauts on long-duration missions. On planetary surfaces, inflatable shelters coated with regolith-binding polymers may serve as habitats and storm shelters alike, their composite soil armor reflecting both thermal extremes and micrometeor strikes. Simultaneously, efforts in terraforming and planetary defense, installing asteroid deflection systems or constructing megascale sunshades at L1, extend the concept of armor to planetary scales, wrapping the Earth in a protective canopy to guard against existential hazards. Machine-human symbiosis. Looking ahead, exoskeletal frameworks will blur the line between person and machine. Powered armor suits, once the stuff of speculative fiction, are becoming reality in laboratories. Hydraulic actuators amplify human strength, wearable sensors monitor fatigue, and direct power assist only when needed. And augmented reality visors overlay threat assessments directly onto the wearer's field of vision. These systems marry the layered defense of medieval harnesses with 21st century robotics and AI, promising warriors, responders, and industrial workers both enhanced protection and superhuman capabilities. Ethical integration will require careful choreography of autonomy, ensuring that human judgment remains central even as machines shoulder more of the burden. Socio-technical resilience and global commons. In this future, armor cannot be conceived purely as technology. It must be embedded within resilient social structures. Global early warning networks for pandemics, coordinated climate adaptation agreements, and shared norms for AI governance form the institutional cuirass that shields us from systemic shocks. International treaties on cyber warfare, biothreat non-proliferation pacts, and outer space arms control regimes will determine whether protective innovations serve the many or empower the few. The stewardship models of medieval guilds and early scientific societies offer precedents. Collective custodianship of specialized knowledge, codified standards, and reciprocal accountability. The eternal dance of offense and defense. Finally, history reminds us that every armor begets a new weapon, and every weapon a new armor. As additive manufacturing enables rapid proliferation of both protective gear and lethal munitions, the cycle of innovation accelerates. Our task is to shape this cycle toward equilibrium, where human flourishing and collective security advance hand in hand, rather than in perpetual arms races. Thus concludes our epic survey, from the first scraped hides and bone scales to the programmable nanofabrics and cosmic shields of tomorrow. The story of armor is far from over. It lives on in every invention that extends the boundary between life and harm. May the lessons of millennia guide us in forging defenses that not only protect our bodies, but uphold our shared values, ensuring that in an uncertain world, we remain united, resilient, and ever mindful of the delicate interweave of vulnerability and strength. As the clang of steel on shield fades from battlefields, a new generation of artisans and enthusiasts carries the arc of armor into the realms of memory, spectacle, and imagination. In this chapter, we explore the modern revival of historical armors, how living history, film and theatre, and interactive media have resurrected ancient harnesses, transforming them from relics of the past into vibrant, breathing art forms that educate, entertain, and inspire. Living history and reenactment. Across Europe and North America, thousands don mail, plate, and lamellar each year at medieval fairs and battlefield reenactments. These living history events strive for authenticity. Armourers hand-forge riveted chainmail from tempered steel wire, cut and taper plates to the proportions of period examples, and polish finishes with historical abrasives. Participants spend months mastering the proper hanging of greaves and the weight distribution of a full harness, learning not only to move and fight, but to live as their forebears did. Reenactors organize into companies: Saxon Fyrds, Viking war bands, Napoleonic line infantry, each bound by research into kit lists, tailoring, and armament. Campsites replicate period encampments. Tents, pitched with authentic pegs, cooking over hearths of beechwood charcoal, and crafting daily tasks in the very styles of the age. Through these embodied practices, armour becomes a lens into social structures: who wields plate, who wears mail, and how labour, rank, and gender shaped who could afford or maintain protective gear. Film, television, and the spectacle of armour Hollywood and world cinema have long understood armour's dramatic power. From the sweeping pan of knights in shining harness at Chateau Gaillard to the scarred breastplates of fantasy anti-heroes, filmmakers rely on the visual language of metal to convey character, culture, and conflict. Costume studios employ teams of pattern cutters, sculptors, and finishers to produce hero suits: lightweight, articulate plate built from vacuum-formed plastics or aluminum, alongside stunt harnesses, rugged enough for falls and choreographed blows. Directors consult historians and master armourers to strike a balance between practicality and spectacle. Chain coifs must move convincingly, pauldrons must frame the actor's face, and fluting or etching accentuates every turn of body and camera. Iconic film armours, such as the gleaming Gothic suite in Ridley Scott's epics, or the layered samurai lamellar of Kurosawa's dramas, have reignited public fascination, spawning merchandise, museum exhibitions, and cosplay communities that study each rivet and lacing pattern. Cosplay and fantasy armours in the vibrant world of cosplay. From conventions like Comic-Con to online crafting forums, historical and fantasy armours fuse in wildly imaginative hybrids. Makers use modern materials: Evo foam, Warbler thermoplastics, 3D printed detail panels, and weathering paints to mimic battle-worn steel. Tutorials proliferate showing how to sculpt pauldrons over foam bases, hinge gauntlets with elastic straps, and embed LED lights beneath translucent gem cabochons. These creations are more than costumes. They are personal statements. A cosplayer's armour may combine Viking-style scale with clockwork motifs, or reimagine medieval harness as sleek power armour inspired by science fiction. In doing so, they honour traditional armour's forms while pointing toward new aesthetic frontiers, an echo of armourers of old who melted and reforged foreign plates into local styles. Museums, conservation, and scholarship. Beyond performance, armour's modern revival thrives in scholarship and conservation. Curators at institutions like the Royal Armourer, Armories, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Tokyo's Samurai Museum preserve and display original harnesses, sometimes hundreds of years old, scientific analyses, X-ray fluorescence, metallurgical microscopy, and residue testing reveal original alloys, heat treat profiles, and even the organic pigments used in lacing and lacquer. Conservators face the challenge of stabilizing rusted iron rings and delaminating lacquer without obliterating centuries of patina. Their work informs replica makers who strive to match not only form but material properties, recreating period-accurate spring temper in mail and the precise carbon content in Damascus-style blades. Academic conferences, peer-reviewed journals, and interdisciplinary projects ensure that armor's heritage remains a living field of study, feeding back into reenactment, film, and design. Interactive media, games and virtual reality. Finally, digital worlds allow every user to don virtual harness. Video games, whether realistic historical simulations or high fantasy epics, model armor systems with hit point modifiers, mobility penalties, and visual customization. Titles that emphasize research fidelity enable players to study 3D scans of medieval brigandines or compare the defensive values of mail versus plate. Virtual reality experiences go further. Users can step into a medieval armory, lift a mail shirt whose weight shifts realistically with each movement, or feel the resistance of a Polin as they practice a sword cut. These immersive encounters foster kinesthetic understanding of armor's mass, balance, and protective envelope, an educational frontier that marries ancient craft with cutting-edge technology. The modern resurrection of armor reaches far beyond fairs and film sets, seeping into the very fabric of contemporary design, where functionality and fashion collide and tactical necessity borrows freely from medieval precedent. In this part, we examine how historical armor inspires today's protective equipment and high-concept style, forging an aesthetic and technical continuum between past and present. Tactical gear and urban plate, law enforcement and private security professionals increasingly favor modular vests and carriers that recall medieval brigandines and coat of plates, arrays of overlapping plates affixed inside soft shells. Contemporary plate carriers, often in muted urban camo, incorporate quick-release buckles and MOLLE webbing, allowing operators to attach ballistic or trauma plates precisely where needed. The segmented construction echoes Gothic folds and pauldrons. Each panel moves independently, conforming to the wearer's torso during crouching, running, or climbing. Reinforced collars and groin protectors, direct descendants of medieval tassets and codpieces, guard vital junctions, while helmet shells adopt vented, fluted shapes that deflect shrapnel, much like the fluting of 15th century Salis deflected sword blows. Avant-garde and runway armor high fashion has long turned to armor's sculptural forms for inspiration. Designers like Alexander McQueen and Iris van Herpen have translated plate and scale into garments of laser-cut leather, 3D printed resin, and glossy PVC. McQueen's Savage Beauty collection featured bodices segmented into overlapping panels that clung like a second skin, while Van Herpen's magnetic motion harnesses fuse thousands of tiny rings into metallic mesh gowns whose light-catching surfaces evoke chainmail. These pieces blur the line between protection and display. Though not ballistic rated, their rigid components reference the silhouette of breastplates and vambraces, asserting armor as a statement of empowerment and boundary making in the modern body. Industrial and sports safety hybrids equipment suppliers for extreme sports athletes and industrial workers have adopted articulated plates in unexpected ways. Rock climbers wear harnesses with integrated rigid shells at hips and thighs, borrowed from ski racing suits, to guard against edge strikes. Ice climbers affix miniature crampon-friendly plates on shins to block falling ice. Speedway racers don arm guard jackets with carbon fiber panels over a neoprene base, mimicking the layered protection of late medieval brigandines, but optimized for abrasion from pavement, not steel blade. Even construction harnesses incorporate padded dorsal plates, invoking horse barding, to distribute fall arrest forces across a broader area, reducing spinal compression in the event of a drop. Wearable tech meets armor aesthetics. The rise of smart garments has given armor a digital overlay. Riot control shields now integrate impact sensors that record the force and location of blows, feeding data to helmet-mounted HUDs that guide police in real time. Similarly, protective motocross jerseys embed flexible foam panels with silvered inlays that monitor muscle strain and impact, their segmented patterns echoing brigandine rivet lines while serving as electrode matrices. These hybrid pieces sit at the intersection of old and new. They channel the visual grammar of medieval plate, while equipping wearers with biometric and environmental intelligence. Architectural and environmental armor's influence extends even to building design. Flood-resilient homes in low-lying regions are encased in layered barriers, steel pilings set before reinforced concrete walls, clad in fiber-reinforced polymer panels that break up wave energy, much like the lamellar plates of a samurai cuirass diffuse arrow strikes. Facades of earthquake-prone skyscrapers incorporate tuned mass dampers enclosed within composite armor shells that both decorate and stabilize, recalling how Renaissance field fortifications combined earth and wood with angled bastions to absorb cannon shots. Cultural and artistic reinvention. Contemporary artists have embraced armor as both medium and metaphor. Sculptors such as Sophie Ryder craft monumental steel figures draped in chainmail, while installation artists hang vast tapestries of decommissioned bulletproof vests, inviting reflection on protection, violence, and vulnerability. Through these works, armor transcends its materiality to become an icon of collective memory, an acknowledgement that the shields we once bore in battle now shield minds and hearts in arenas of social change, museum curation and conservation. Renowned institutions such as the Royal Armouries, UK, the Wallace Collection, London, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, steward vast collections of historical armours. Curators face the twin challenges of preservation and interpretation. Iron mail sleeves are meticulously de-oiled and treated to prevent rust. Delicate lacquered lamellar panels are stabilized in controlled humidity cases. Textile lining fragments are consolidated under magnification. Exhibition design brings these artifacts to life. Mannequins posed in dynamic battle-ready stances, cutaway displays revealing internal construction, and interactive stations where visitors feel replicas of ringmail or run their hands over polished fluting. Contextual panels and multimedia guides explain the social rank, geographic origins, and manufacturing processes of each piece, transforming cold steel into stories of human ingenuity. Digital archives and 3D accessibility. To broaden access beyond museum walls, institutions now partner with digital platforms. High-resolution photogrammetry captures every dent and etch of a 16th century breastplate, producing 3D models that anyone can rotate, zoom, and examine online. Virtual reality armories allow users to browse collections by region or era, while augmented reality apps overlay repair notes or X-ray visualizations onto real objects viewed through a tablet camera. Open access databases catalog makers' marks, forging techniques, and provenance records, enabling scholars worldwide to trace the circulation of armor styles and materials. Digital repositories also safeguard data against physical loss. Should a rare parade harness suffer damage or a historical site be threatened, its digital twin endures for study. Community workshops and living scholarship. Beyond formal institutions, grassroots communities sustain armor heritage through hands-on learning. Blacksmithing guilds host workshops where participants learn to draw out temper lines in steel, forge rivets by hand, and weave mail rings to period specifications. Leatherworkers teach lamellar lacing techniques with traditional tools, beeswax-coated cords, bone awls, and wooden scales. These skill shares often partner with local history societies to reconstruct lost methods, from Viking beard protection to Mughal elephant barding, building entire suits over months in communal settings. The knowledge generated is then published as open-source pattern libraries and tutorial videos, ensuring that even remote learners can partake in the craft. Educational programs and interpretive events, school curricula, increasingly integrate experiential modules on armor history. Students might visit a museum to handle safe replica gauntlets, then collaborate on building a cardboard scale panel that teaches structural principles. Drama departments stage medieval pageants where young actors don simplified gambesons and run choreographed melee drills, internalizing the weight and movement of real armor. Public history festivals, Renaissance fairs, armor and arms conventions feature live demonstrations by master craftsmen, panel discussions with conservators, and hands-on stations for forging rivets or dyeing cords. These events invigorate museum collections with performance, turning static displays into dynamic classrooms. Collaborative research and publication interdisciplinary teams, from metallurgists to textile conservators, from anthropologists to digital archivists, collaborate on published research that advances understanding of armor. Journal articles analyze alloy compositions of surviving iron rings. Conference proceedings document novel theories on medieval workshop organization. Open access monographs compare cross-cultural helmet typologies. Collaborative funding, often via heritage grants or public-private partnerships, underwrites traveling exhibitions and digitization projects, making remote or under-resourced collections visible to a global audience. The living legacy of armor. Through these combined efforts, museum stewardship, digital innovation, community craft, educational outreach, and scholarly collaboration, armor endures not just as museum relics, but as living traditions. Each restored breastplate, each 3D scan, and each workshop taught ensures that the lessons of layered defense and creative adaptation continue to inspire new generations. As our odyssey through the history of armor draws to its close, we turn inward, from the external layers of steel and leather to the invisible armors we forge in our minds, societies, and shared beliefs. In this final chapter, we explore how the lessons of layered defense, adaptation, and craft inform the ways we construct identity, wield power, and cultivate resilience in an age where protection transcends the physical and becomes woven into every facet of our lives. Long before the first mail ring was interlocked or the first plate hammered, humans hid within communities that offered safety in numbers. That primal social armor endures today. Trust networks, family bonds, and civic institutions form the first line of defense against isolation, fear, and chaos. When we pledge allegiance to a flag, join a professions guild, or entrust our data to an online platform, we are donning intangible harnesses, agreements, and conventions that guard us against the unknowable perils of anonymity and fragmentation. Just as a knight's heraldry broadcasts lineage and loyalty, our personal brands and digital personas signal belonging. A surgeon's white coat, a judge's robes, or the verified badge on social media serve as symbolic cuirasses. They confer credibility, set expectations, and delineate authority. Yet they also create soft spots. Assumed competence can be punctured by malpractice or misinformation, reminding us that every emblem of power demands continuous maintenance, education, ethical vigilance, and transparent accountability. We build further armoring in our laws and norms. Constitutions, charters, and codes of conduct function like written gambesons, quilts of interwoven principles designed to absorb shocks to the social fabric. Unexpected crises, abuses of privilege, or rapid technological change. When judges interpret these texts, or when citizens refer to foundational rights, they reinforce the stitching that holds society's layers together, preventing tears that could widen into social rupture. Yet power's armor can weigh heavily. Bureaucracies, once erected to protect citizens, may ossify into rigid plate mail that resists innovation. Corporate and governmental bodies laden with compliance checks, risk management protocols, and security clearances can become so encumbered that they struggle to respond nimbly when new threats emerge. The parallel with medieval full harness is instructive. When a knight's armor becomes too heavy, mobility and situational awareness suffer, and the same holds for institutions burdened by their own protective measures. True resilience, therefore, arises from articulation and adaptability. Just as plate artisans joined rigid laminar with sliding rivets, modern organizations layer safeguards that can be rolled back or redeployed. Emergency powers with sunset clauses, modular privacy settings that users can adjust, disaster response frameworks that scale up during crises and contract in normal times. These articulated systems absorb shocks without constricting the vital flow of ideas, innovation, and human connection. At the individual level, mental armor takes the form of boundaries, routines, and practices, mindfulness, therapy, peer support, that cultivate emotional resilience. In an era of perpetual information bombardment, we learn to filter noise, compartmentalize stressors, and recharge our inner batteries. Much like a soldier retreats to camp to clean and re-oil his harness before rejoining the fray. The healthiest among us recognize when to unbuckle layers, to seek edgeless comfort among trusted kin, and to rearm with new perspectives when necessary. Finally, we return to creativity, the crucible where old materials find new form. Artists, writers, and technologists wield armor's symbolism to challenge power, to hold it up for inspection, or to transform it into instruments of liberation. The poet who writes of shields of silence, or the coder who designs open source encryption, both echo the ancient armorer's quest to craft protection that empowers the vulnerable, not to fortify the privileged against accountability. Having examined the invisible armors of identity, law, and habit, we now turn to concrete instances where these social and psychological defenses are woven into communal practice, where layering, articulation, and shared stewardship translate into civic resilience, digital trust, and equitable empowerment. Community platforms as digital brigandines, online forums and cooperative platforms, open source wikis, peer-to-peer networks, and federated social media embody the principle of distributed, patchable defense. No single central server is the weak point. Instead, each node carries its own small plate of content and moderation tools. Should one instance be compromised by disinformation or extremist activity, the surrounding instances can quarantine it without bringing down the entire network, mirroring how a brigandine's interior plate can be replaced individually without refitting the whole garment. Projects like Mastodon or Matrix illustrate this model. Communities self-govern their content policies, share moderation best practices, and rapidly update code when novel threats appear. Their federated structure affords resilience. If a single server administrator falters, users can migrate to another node, preserving continuity of trust and discourse. Participatory budgeting, fiscal folds and flexible plates. Municipal participatory budgeting processes apply ARMA's adaptable layering to public finance. Instead of a monolithic budget that risks choking innovation, cities carve funding into thematic plates: education, infrastructure, health, each governed by citizen assemblies. Residents propose and vote on projects within their plate, and the municipal government integrates approved initiatives into the overall fiscal framework. This segmented approach echoes the articulated fold of a 15th century harness. Each overlapping plate moves independently, allowing local priorities to flex, even as the broader structure remains intact. When emergencies strike, budgets can reallocate resources within a plate without dismantling the entire process, ensuring both stability and responsiveness. Crisis response drills as arming rituals, just as medieval knights rehearsed donning their harness before battle. Modern communities conduct preparedness drills, earthquake simulations, pandemic tabletop exercises, cybersecurity war games that embed protective routines into collective memory. Hospitals run mass casualty drills. Schools practice lockdown protocols. Regional coalitions stage mock cyber attacks on municipal services. These rehearsals inscribe muscle memory and institutional habit into organizational culture, so that when real crises arrive, actions unfold with practiced precision rather than panicked improvisation. Debriefings act as maintenance checks, identifying rusted rivets, process gaps, or stretched leathers, overburdened teams, and lead to iterative improvements in plans, communications. And Kaisa, resource stockpiles, legal and ethical frameworks as constitutional constitutions, human rights charters, and international treaties serve as normative choruses, binding layers of text that defend individuals and groups against abuses of power. Courts and oversight bodies function like skilled armorers, interpreting, adjusting, and repairing these frameworks in light of new challenges. Digital surveillance, gene editing, mass data collection, amendment mechanisms, sunset clauses, and judicial review provide the articulation that prevents ossification. When technology or social norms evolve, say around privacy or bioethics, these constitutional plates can be recalibrated, preserving core protections while accommodating innovation. Educational curricula as apprenticeships in armoring. Embedding armor-making metaphors into education cultivates resilient citizens. Programs that teach media literacy compare critical thinking to inspecting one's own plate links, questioning sources, assessing logical coherence and polishing biases. Civic education modules frame voting and public service as collective arming rights, each elective and deliberation reinforcing the social harness that protects democracy's core. By guiding students through small-scale projects, organizing school budgets, moderating online class forums, or simulating crisis responses, educators impart both conceptual frameworks and practical skills, ensuring future generations can don and maintain the intangible armors of an open society. We look forward, exploring how our layered social, digital, and legal defenses prepare us for challenges not yet fully known, and how the craft of collective armoring must evolve to safeguard our shared future. Anticipating novel threats. Just as medieval armorers adapted to new weapons, siege engines, crossbows, firearms, our societies must remain vigilant to emerging hazards. Rapid climate change brings cascading disasters, wildfires, floods, heat waves, and pandemics interacting in complex ways. Our civic armor must layer climate-resilient infrastructure, public health surveillance, and ecosystem restoration. We need dynamic stockpiles of medical supplies, flexible legal frameworks for emergency powers, and community networks that can pivot from wildfire response to disease containment without skipping a beat. Adaptive governance and iterative design. Rigid hierarchies falter when confronted by fast-moving crises. Instead, we require governance models that iterate like smart armor. Real-time data feeds inform policy plate adjustments. Experimental pilot programs serve as test shots. Sunset provisions trigger automatic reviews. Cities might deploy modular ordinances that activate only under defined conditions. Lockdown rules that self-repeal when case counts fall. Emergency utility rationing schemes that scale with demand. Such articulation prevents both legislative gridlock and overreach. Cultivating distributed leadership. Historically, the best defensive formations relied on decentralized command, phalanx centers flanked by agile skirmishers. Today's equivalents are networked leadership structures, cross-sector coalitions of government, business, academia, and civil society that share authority and resources. When cyber attacks strike critical infrastructure, response teams comprising utility operators, national security agencies, and local IT experts must coordinate seamlessly. Such distributed leadership builds redundancy. If one node is compromised, others carry on the mission. Resilience through redundancy and diversity armor works best when multiple layers back each other up. In supply chains, just-in-time efficiency creates brittle systems prone to single-point failures. By contrast, resilient economies embrace redundancy, diverse suppliers, decentralized production, and redundant logistics corridors, much like overlapping mail rings protect against a puncture. Cultural diversity similarly strengthens social armors. Communities with multiple languages, faiths, and traditions often exhibit greater mutual aid and creative problem-solving when crises occur. Embedding ethical reflexivity. Every layer of defense must incorporate ethical guardrails to prevent defensive tools from becoming instruments of harm. Surveillance technologies deployed to monitor disease outbreaks can be repurposed for social control. Legislation enacted for emergency powers can calcify into authoritarian practices. Establishing independent oversight bodies, sunset reviews, and transparent reporting embeds self-testing mechanisms into our armors. Much as a knight periodically inspects and reconditions his harness to ensure it protects rather than constrains. fostering a culture of preparedness. Ultimately, the strength of any armor is determined by those who wear it. Cultivating a culture where readiness and mutual care are shared the values transforms passive protections into living shields. Educational campaigns that demystify emergency procedures, community drills that invite participation from all age groups, and narratives that celebrate acts of solidarity turn abstract plans into practiced instinct. In this way, preparedness becomes second nature, the automatic rhythm of everyday life, just as fastening buckles and checking straps were for medieval warriors, the continuing dance of innovation. As technologies such as artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and quantum communications advance, they will both present new vulnerabilities and offer novel defenses. The arms race will persist. AI-driven disinformation pitted against algorithmic fact-checks, gene editing tools balanced by biosafety firewalls, quantum-secure networks countering quantum-powered eavesdroppers. Our challenge is to ensure that innovation in offense is met with equal vigor in defense, guided by the same principles of layering, articulation, and shared stewardship that armored our ancestors. Thus concludes our exploration of armor in its many forms, from bone-scale vests to digital firewalls, from ceremonial plate to societal resilience. The true lesson of military harnesses is not the metals or materials, but the enduring design virtues, layered protection, adaptability to new threats, decentralized collaboration, and ethical craftsmanship. As we face an uncertain future, may we carry forward these principles, continually forging, refining, and sharing the armors that safeguard not just our bodies, but our communities, our freedoms, and our common humanity.